Good evening and welcome to the January 21st Board of Finance regular meeting. Welcome and thank you to SCTV for filming. We do have two presentations tonight. The first is by our advisor fiducian on the pensions and OPEB funds that we are charged with overseeing, and also on the potential purchase of 2 West Street. And then we'll be doing reviews of our regular financial statements and finally reviewing budget parameters and discussing whether to give further guidance. We had said in December that we might, and we will have that discussion later tonight. So please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, which is to our right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we begin, Amy did forward us a link to the FOIA presentation. Thank you, it was excellent. We do have Mike Doyle on speakerphone. When that is speaking, that will be identified as Mike Doyle for our members of the public and also for our clerk. Quick status updates from Mark. Mark, we are still waiting on a draft for the annual report, and chairs have not yet received requests for letters, so you could just let us know timeline for that.
We'll probably have that right after the budget submission, which obviously is February 10th.
Okay.
So about a week or so after that, Chair, we'll have that to you.
Okay, great.
Thanks so much.
Housekeeping, I had asked Amy, and I think this is forthcoming, to please post the tri-board letter on the budget page.
That's all set.
Oh, great, thank you. To add the updated budget calendar dates and just confirm the dates, make sure that we've got those. And then I know Amy was going to update the policy on transfers on the website. Awesome, thank you, much appreciated. Okay, are there other updates from other members before we proceed with fiducian? Okay. We have with us Chris Cashmark from Fiducian, and we do this twice a year with the full board, and then we meet 4 times a year with our subcommittee. Todd Burke is the chair of the subcommittee, but I'll turn it over to you, Chris, to walk us through what you have. Thank you.
Oh, great. Good evening, everyone. Good to see folks, as always, and trust everyone's well. So this will be, we're kind of in an interesting time just in terms of the cycle. We're just in front of completing the 4th quarter reconciliations and getting the information ready for the subcommittee, and we'll obviously have that in advance of the February meeting. So I thought what we would do is at a very high level use the most recent packet, the September packet, just to kind of reiterate some of the things we've talked about with the subcommittee, where we stand with the plans, and we can certainly roll a little bit in anecdotally of what went on in the 4th quarter, which was a kind of a contrast to what we saw for most of the year. So I'll be quick here. I'm going to hit just highlights. As always, stop me along the way if something doesn't make sense or needs more clarification. In the packet, I might skip, Amy, all the way to page 8. And you'll see there, this is just a good place to start. I think the top half of the page, as you all be familiar with, are capital market returns through September. So the vertical bars, of course, are the full 9-month experience ending September. And then if you can make it out there, you see the encircled numbers, which were the Q3 numbers in isolation. The general takeaway for the board, of course, is that, by and large, a good portion of the year was very productive for capital market outcomes, right? Both equities and fixed income were doing particularly well as we came into the fall time frame. And really, maybe the only things that stand out here I would offer up. You see square in the middle of the exhibit, the large cap, the gray bar there, the best performers of the year. And we've talked about this, you'll remember at the subcommittee, right? The kind of that weird complexion of equity returns where we've had good global outcomes, but really it's been those AI hyperscaler tech names in the U.S. that have led the S&P, for example, higher and pretty dramatically so. And that theme carried a little bit into the 4th quarter. The data is not on the page here. We did have a bit of a step back in Q4, and we'll see that in our subcommittee meeting in a couple of weeks' time. Bonds actually in the 4th quarter alone, were down about 3%. So you see there, third in from the left, they gave up a decent amount of their return for the year in Q4 as interest rates moved sharply higher, and equity markets globally were down about 1%. So we did have a little bit of a retrenchment. Again, I think all start to finish still pretty good years for all the plans, as we'll see momentarily. But new administration, new potential policies, pretty good outcomes, right, as we mentioned through September. So a little bit of a kind of reticence and some catching up from investors, and you saw that on display in Q4. So that is kind of the bigger picture backdrop. I am going to skip all the way ahead to page 19 and just step away from markets and performance for just a minute. Remember, each quarter we work through the governance calendar with the subcommittee, right? So we're talking about markets, we're talking about performance, we're talking about the portfolios every time we convene, but also there are other topics that we want to stay attuned to. And you'll remember what we talked about at our most recent subcommittee meeting were assumptions around rates of return for the pension plans, and then moreover funded statuses. And we won't go through this in great detail, but we've got the information summarized for the government, the Board of Ed, and the police plan. And you've got a 6.5% return assumption, as you know, very consistent with what we see statewide. In fact, that's the median statewide, 6.5%. And you have a very representative, diversified allocation to support that. And we don't think that there's any issues with a 6.5% number, and we'll test that again explicitly for the subcommittee at our next meeting in February and share that. And then your funded statuses range from 70 to 80% as well, according to which plan we're talking about. So if you jump to page 22. You'll see there just some statewide trends. You see the collection or histograms of returns there in the lower left-hand corner of the page, and then in the lower right, this is that trend we've talked about and Milliman's talked to you about forever, right? The industry's been dragging those return assumptions down pretty consistently through time. I think at 6.5%, we've probably reached, and I think your actuary will agree with this, I don't know that we need to do much more in terms of dragging returns down. I think we're fully supportive of where you stand today. I don't think returns are going to be shooting up anytime soon, but I think all that work you've done to get more conservative around return assumptions is in the rear view mirror, I think, and I don't think you're going to hear a lot of call from the actuary to do more there. I think they'll be comfortable with it as well. And then just from a funded status perspective on page 24, if you jump, Amy, 2 ahead, you'll see there just kind of over the last several years where we stand. Again, I mentioned typical plan statewide, somewhere in the order mid-70s. And again, arithmetically, when you look at your 3 plans, you're somewhere in the mid-70s. And again, with a representative return assumption. From our standpoint, just as investment practitioners, we think you're in fine working order from where you stand on the assumption front and then where you are from a funded status standpoint. And again, the actuaries obviously will give you more color and perspective there through time. Anything from the board on that may not make sense, needs more? Relatively straightforward, I think, right? The only other thing I'd mention quickly, again on page 26, kudos to the town as always. This is just a little bit of detail on the OPEB front, and you can see there in the lower left-hand corner, almost half of plans still, right? More than half of plans haven't even funded or formed a trust yet statewide. You did that years ago. You've got a well-funded plan trust now. You're in great working order, we think, from where you stand with the OPEB trust obligations. And again, you thought about that early, you funded it early, you formed it early, and as we'll see momentarily, you've got a pretty substantial pool of assets now that support those liabilities.
Just had a question on that. We have Amy's report following this, and it didn't look like there were any expenditures from the OPEB trust fund. Are we seeing expenditures out of that?
We don't typically see expenditures out of OPEB Trust. We get, Lisa, periodically we get from Amy contributions, that we put to work according to your existing strategy. We'll get dividends off of those ETF funds that you're invested in that we'll redeploy. But we haven't had a lot of outflows out of the trust, right?
No, so we hadn't been using the trust because it wasn't 100% funded. And now that it is 100% funded, we will be working with them to actually start using the trust for our retirement claims. But at the end of the fiscal year, you'll see that there is an expenditure entry in those financial statements. At the end of the year, we take a report from Cigna that gives us all of our retiree claims, and we do an allocation to the OPEB fund.
Oh, to replenish the,
Yeah, to reimburse the
so we do an
Cigna
internal,
fund.
sort of an internal loan. Okay, that's what I was missing. Thank you. So we are actually taking it out, but you don't see it until the year end.
So we're not taking it out of the fund currently. We're showing the expenditures in the appropriate fund, but it's being funded by the health insurance fund. We weren't using this fund because it wasn't 100% funded.
So at year end, we're gonna see an expenditure out of the OPEB into the other fund to pay for what we spent.
Right, so you'll see a revenue and an expenditure from OPEB because we haven't been using that fund. And then probably this year, either this year or next year, most likely this year when we work with Jen, you'll just see the expenditure and we'll start taking the money out of the OPEB.
When you say this year, you mean 2025?
2025.
And remember, you've got a very liquid portfolio, right? So there's no impediments to getting at monies as needed from your current mix.
Okay, great.
So that was the governance updates. I am going to use on page 27, the subcommittee members will remember, I'm just going to use the town plan as the basic proxy. Remember that the Board of Ed and the police plans share allocations, share manager rosters. The returns are extremely similar, if not identical, in terms of across the three plans. So I think this is as good as any place to kind of give you that perspective. You see in the upper left-hand corner of the page, the plan was up about 6% in the third quarter, running about 11.2% on a year-to-date basis through September, and you see the 20% number on a one-year. And then numbers generally that align with the broad markets, again, net of those manager fees longer term. And north of longer term as well, right? Those return expectations. So I think generally the performance situation continues to be a constructive one. You'll remember we have taken some action, right, with some of the laggard managers and some of the ones that had contributed to that small measure of recent underperformance. Templeton International Small Company, you'll remember we pulled out of the programs in the middle of last year. And then more recently, you'll remember we did switch up the fixed income a little bit. You'll actually see that on page 28. You'll remember the legacy managers, MetWest and Western, were taken out of the three pension plans and were replaced by Dodge and Cox. And the Hartford strategy, which you'll remember sub-advised by Wellington out of Boston. So I think we're trying to be proactive around when we see managers that might be struggling a little bit and the thesis has changed, and kind of getting out in front of that and getting you repositioned to kind of get back to where we want to be on a performance basis and relative to benchmark. So you'll see that action there, and those numbers again are obviously replicated. If you're inclined, you'll see it for Board of Ed on 29 and 30. Again, should look close to identical, and similarly for the police plan on 31 and 32. Again, right, they really share everything, so the numbers look very, very similar. We'll see. I haven't seen numbers just yet for Q4. I'll probably see them this week, but again, a little bit of probably of a step back, right? Just given what we talked about with fixed income and with global equities. We started in September, right, a little north of 11%. I think we'll still be comfortably ahead of your actuarial assumption. Not that we're thinking about it on a fiscal year basis, but nonetheless, just to give you guideposts, I think we're kind of churning away in the right direction of things. But a little bit of indigestion from investors in Q4, as we described, with some of the things going on, politically and elsewhere. Anything from folks on pension plan? Everyone's okay?
How do you view potential tariffs impacting?
Yeah, it's really tough, Lisa, to handicap that just yet without absent any of the details. I don't think trade wars are great for things, right? And if we do tariffs, I think our trading partners will probably meet us with tariffs, and I'm not sure in the grand scheme of things that's not a political statement, it's an economic statement, right? I'm not sure that's all that great. But that's something that we'll just have to see how it fleshes out. But we do enter the year kind of maybe more pragmatically. Capital market valuations are stretched right now. Equity market valuations are pretty full. Fixed income interest rates have gone up a measure, but incremental spreads are still tight. So we kind of don't have a lot of leeway right now, just because we're kind of entering the year with those somewhat elevated valuations. We've had 2 years running now, right, of 20% some odd returns in equity. So it's not like we haven't had the benefit of that. But I do think, some of this talk from Washington and what that may mean, and deficits and spending around that are going to be probably challenging in the first half of the year. And then, as you've all read, right, the narrative around the Fed and what they may do with interest rates has changed as well. If you looked 3 or 4 months ago, everyone was all in on the Fed with pretty good consistency, continuing to reduce rates. They did do that in December again, you'll remember, but now they're probably going to put the brakes on a little bit because inflation's been a bit more sticky than maybe they first thought. So we may go a couple of months now in meetings without any action on interest rates. You'll remember they've cut 100 basis points out of Fed funds from where they were a year ago. And I think the markets do expect before the year's out maybe another cut or two. But not with quite the confidence that we had a few months back. And I know there's maybe a question kind of coming on expectations for income. We can talk a little bit about that because that'll feed into that in a minute.
Do you have any concerns about stagflation?
About what?
Stagflation?
No, I don't think so just yet, right? The economy is still growing. And actually, the undercurrents macroeconomically, by and large, are still pretty solid. If you look at GDP growth, it's still very solid quarter over quarter. Corporate fundamentals, earnings, and cash flow generating ability and ability to service debt, so all those measures are still very solid. The labor markets have kind of been a little bit weaker recently, but still, in the grand scheme of things, are really very solid. So I don't think we're in an environment, to your question, Lisa, right, where we're going to have stagflation. I don't think. I think there's too many good things still going on. But the inflation, metric is a sticky one, right? It's come way down from where it was, but it's kind of, as you've all seen, kind of stopped a little bit and is kind of hovering and not reacting quite as dramatically to what the Fed might be doing. So that is certainly something that they'll keep tabs on. The last thing we'll do here, if it's okay with folks, on page 33, you'll see the OPEB trust returns. Their allocations, you'll remember, are not identical, but are similar to the pension plans by and large. And you can see there the returns in the upper left-hand corner of the page are not all that different, up about 6% for the quarter, 12.3% you see there year to date, and a decent number on the 1 year. And you'll remember, right, if you go to page 34, the complexion here from an investment standpoint is a little bit different, right? We're all indexed in the OPEB trust. For the time being. That's something I think with the subcommittee we'll continue to peck away at in the coming year, whether there's appetite to begin to introduce some active management here at $25.5 million. You certainly have the wherewithal to do that now. But it's been very convenient, cost-effective, right? A way to get a diverse program in place, and obviously over time has worked very nicely. So it's tough to argue with. You've got nice diversity from an asset class standpoint, and again, very low fees, right? All else equal. So something we can talk about. But to the point made earlier, there's not many communities in the state that have $25.5 million OPEB trusts. That's for sure. So you're way out in front on that, just in terms of addressing those obligations and setting aside assets to do so. Anything on OPEB from folks? So if not, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put on my Tyler Polk hat. So I don't know if I'll be as effective as Tyler is, but I'm going to try here, and we'll kind of catch you up or just remind ourselves of where we stand on the DC plans. That information starts on, let me see where to get you going here. I think 42. You'll remember from a governance standpoint, Q3 was just recasting the attributes and features of your programs, your defined contribution programs versus from nationwide averages, right? And by and large, you are offering and doing the things that many of your peers are doing, and there weren't really anything outstanding from a deficit, or a deficiency standpoint in terms of what you're doing with the programs and their features and kind of how you have them set up on behalf of the participants. So 42 and 43 kind of catalog that. Again, I'm in the interest of time not going to go through all of it. I know the subcommittee's heard that already, but in good working order from our standpoint. And then the other two topics were cybersecurity. 44 is just a little bit of a reminder, right? The Department of Labor continues to sniff around here and spend a lot of time thinking about it. The reminder for the Board of Finance, on your behalf every year, we poll your record keeper. So Mission Square, your record keeper. The details are deeper in the booklet. We won't go into them unless you want to. But we have a pretty thorough process we go through every year with questionnaires and professional to professional conversations, tech to tech, and just make sure that Mission Square is doing everything that they should be doing. And you've got our assurance just in terms of doing a lot of these throughout the course of a year that Mission Square is certainly putting a lot of resources on the effort and kind of from our standpoint doing good work in terms of securing participant data and plan information and the like. So no concerns from us on that front. Your managed account affirmation, again, in the interest of time, I'm going to jump to page 50. Remember, Morningstar is the engine used for managed accounts. This is just a recast or a resummary of some of their approach and then mentality around it, and they are, we think, quite capable at it and do good work on your participants' behalfs, for those who choose to use it, right? So I think Morningstar, again, continues to be in good shape and no concern there. And then finally, switching gears here, starting on 52, you'll see the collection of 457 assets. Again, no changes really quarter over quarter as you would expect in terms of fund utilization from participants. And you do see on the very bottom of the exhibit there kind of a nice pickup, right, over the last couple of quarters, just in terms of the progress we've seen in capital market returns and participants participating in that, which is nice. So $18.5 million in the 457 at the end of September. I think in pretty good shape. And then if you jump to 53 and 54, we've got the Board of Ed plan and the 401A. And again, kind of similarly, pretty consistent utilization of the plans or where the assets are at the individual plan level quarter over quarter. Nothing really to highlight in terms of material changes. And then finally on 55, you do have the T-Row target date suite, as you'll remember, and we do spend a lot of time, our research team does, re-underwriting that effort kind of on a dynamic basis, meeting with their counterparts in Baltimore at T-Row who oversee that strategy on your behalf, that suite on your behalf. And from thoughtful glide paths in the lower left-hand corner of the page through to kind of the diversified nature of investing that they do in the lower right-hand corner of the page, they've been one of the more consistent and successful target date providers, as you're all familiar with. And again, no concerns from our standpoint on anything going on with that effort at T-Row. I'm not going to go through all of them because there's nothing actionable, but on 56 and all the way running through to 60, you'll see 61 even with some of the calendar year stuff. You'll see a whole host of performance numbers, nothing really that stands out. Generally, managers are kind of doing as advertised and expected in terms of performance. The only things I might highlight, remember, following on the heels of what happened in the pension plans, Western is coming out for Dodge and Cox as the fixed income option for DC participants. You'll remember that action. We do have a couple of elevated statuses, MFS Value and Vanguard Explorer, elevated to discuss kind of our lower concern issue. Just kind of changes with portfolio teams and sub-advisory makeups that we're monitoring. Nothing that our research team ultimately thinks will transpire into anything actionable, but just something to be aware of. And then we did elevate the Hartford Strategy International Opportunities, which you'll remember we have in the pension plans as well, to a watch status. So there is a long-standing portfolio manager who's retiring from that effort. An important contributor to the effort and certainly a magnitude of a change that our research team is spending a lot of time on. Nothing, again, to take action on just yet, but we'll keep you posted. And we'll provide the subcommittee an update as well in February when we meet. And just in terms of statuses, the rest of the lineup all on maintain, as you see there, by and large, and in good working order. So that, Mr. Chairman, is the update. I don't know if I did the Tyler Polk role well or not, but I did my best. I'm not a DC guy, but I tried. Happy to take questions on this, on anything else that you might.
Why don't we start with the interest?
With your interest
in the budget.
So you mentioned 4.25, right? Has been kind of the current guidepost in terms of modeling. We've had this question from a couple of clients. Actually, I had this very conversation with Amy's counterpart at Avon a week and a half ago. I think the markets still expect the Fed to cut a little bit, and you'll know over time that those money market rates and yields and stiff yields ultimately kind of corral around that activity with the Fed. So if there's another 25 basis point cut coming sometime in the next couple of months, that 4.25 is likely going to fall to 4%, right? Those money market rates will follow pretty quickly down to where the Fed may be with Fed funds. So I do think probably all else equal over the course of a calendar year, as we sit here in January through the end of the year, I don't think we see 4.25 type yields on money market at the end of the year. I think we'd probably see something more akin to 4-ish. I don't know if things really get comfortable on the inflation front. You could see in the back end of the year another cut, to 375. So
you mean the calendar year or the fiscal year?
What's that?
Are you talking calendar year?
Yeah, just thinking I had calendar year, Lisa, right? So I know that doesn't correspond exactly with fiscal year. But I would think in terms of a starting point, if you've got that ammunition right around what the Fed might do, and the markets continue to think we are going to get a cut, even though we're going through a little bit of noise and hesitation right now, I don't think there's anything unreasonable about 4.25 becoming 4% from a forecasted interest perspective.
I think a lot following fiscal years, you think?
I'm sorry?
Is that too aggressive?
I think that's as decent as I think that's a decent guidepost, yes, for the fiscal year too, right? I wouldn't want to go too far out in advance because we don't have a lot of information around that, but I think people are centering on another cut or two forthcoming, and I think money market yields and what you're able to earn there come down a little bit too. Not dramatically, but a touch.
Let's see if other members have questions on that, because that will obviously impact our budget. I wanted to see if other members had questions on that, because that will impact our revenues. Make sure people are comfortable with 4%. Open it up to Amy as well.
I think it's going to be less, but
Yeah.
every
if I could share, Wendy, who just came in, and I were at CCM recently, and this was one of the discussions that came up at CCM about the predicted tug of war, if you will, from the incoming president and the Fed chair as to, how interest rates are going to move. I know Wendy and I were paying attention to that one. So, the jury's out on how those discussions will go, but I'm with Amy. It's probably going to go lower just based on the personalities. But
Yeah, I would agree. The pacing of it's right is a little bit of a challenge, but I think you're right. All else equal, rates probably do continue to come down a bit.
So we have to budget for fiscal year starting July 1 to the following July 1. Should we budget 4? Should we budget 375? Should we budget 39?
and we'll hold you to it.
Yeah, as you should. If an element of conservatism, I would probably budget 375. Honestly,
You're assuming 2 cuts during the year.
yeah.
Thank you. It's not great news, but
You'll be making it too easy on ourselves.
right. All right, thank you for that. Any other questions for Chris? Thank you for coming out.
What I'm getting is we're good both relative to other communities and absolutely. And you've said some things about how the fourth quarter differed. Any projections? I mean, I know you don't like to look ahead too much, but just extrapolating. I mean, you've had this initial bullishness on the market, but as the chair said, we've got the prospect of tariffs, we've got uncertainties in the world and so forth. I mean, what do you?
Yeah, when we meet in a couple of weeks with the subcommittee and we do go through the asset allocation outcomes with you, and we're running them today, you will see year over year that our expectations for markets have come down a bit. And that applies to both fixed income and equity. And in fact, it applies to all the asset classes, quite honestly. And again, it centers on this idea that we've had a pretty strong run in markets, equity markets in particular. Those hurdles going forward, right, become more challenging. You have higher valuations, and right, the markets have to do more work to kind of catch up to that. So you're going to see from us year over year a little bit of a reduction in the projection. Again, I don't think it challenges your 6.5 today. I don't think it goes to that level, particularly when you kind of look at a 10 and a 20-year forecast period and kind of use a hybrid, if you will, which we think is appropriate. But I do think, Art, that the returns are going to, our expectations are somewhat diminished from where they were a year ago.
Okay. Sure.
Just given what we've seen going on. And you're right, we had a kind of a little flare of enthusiasm right after the election, and then markets, as you know, kind of sold off after that. And particularly bond markets in the month of December had a really, really tough time. But equities didn't do all that great either. So we'll kind of bring that all kind of full circle when we get together in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Mark, just one of the things we always ask, Fiducian asks of their investors to fill out the cybersecurity question. We would ask that you do the same for the town.
We will.
Report back to us. Thank you. Okay. I would ask for, thank you very much.
Everyone all set?
Thank you very
Okay,
much.
I'll let you get on with your meeting. Thanks so much.
Without objection, I'm going to recommend that we, since we have invited guests who love everything on our agenda but are probably here for a specific reason, that we amend our agenda and move the finance director's report to after the review and set public hearing for the proposed purchase of a property located at 2 Farms Village. Without objection?
Objection.
So moved. All right, we will then move on. Does anyone need a break before we begin their presentation? Okay. Let's. You're ready to move. Okay. We have with us tonight Katie Pizzula and Amy Merriweather, who will be presenting on the project and walking us through both the numbers and the rationale and the reason why this is being proposed. We also have members of the Board of Education, and of course our first selectman is here as well. So we'll let you begin.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me this evening. As the chairwoman said, I am Katie Crisula. I'm the Director of Pupil Services in the Board of Ed. And Amy's going to help me here as I kind of talk through the vision and the purpose of the proposed program and purchase. But she'll really be able to provide some insight on the numbers and kind of the financial meaning and cost containment behind the proposal.
Katie, before you begin, Amy, could you email me that so that we can look at it on this while you're presenting?
And you're welcome to come over here as well. So again, really just want to talk through kind of why this is an important next step. Certainly some of the historical facts, you guys are aware there has been an increase over the past few years of our out-of-district cost. This is the cost it is to send students to approved private special ed programs that are legally required of us in order to really provide them with a free, appropriate public education. So why is that happening? For two reasons, really. We're seeing an increase in the complexity of special needs of students. That's a statewide issue. Also, the rising costs of these out-of-district tuitions. We have seen as high as over 20% tuition increases in the course of 1 year. So, a $100,000 tuition, it'll go up to $120,000 in the course of 1 year. So when we looked at the out-of-district student needs, there was a specific area of need, a kind of a like student population, and that was in the area of complex emotional disability, behavioral students that require small supported environments in order to be educated in their least restricted environment. We have a cohort of 9 students that are currently enrolled in the same local therapeutic school. This is just down the road from us, a couple miles away. Tuition per student is around $96,000, and that's including transportation. So that's $96,000 per student. We also have roughly 6 secondary students that are placed at different schools across the Hartford area with a similar profile. So in all, about 15 students with this complex emotional disability that are currently placed out of district, and behaviors within our general ed buildings is also something that we're finding is if a student has a complexity around their behavioral needs, it's difficult for us to maintain that level of behavioral support in our buildings, and we go to these out-of-district programs quickly. So what do we need? We need something in the interim, and we need something in their community in order to contain these costs and be able to support our students in their own community. So we are looking at how do we start an in-district program, really being able to provide that alternate environment, a small, structured, self-contained environment, but to do it within the student's own community. So we really want to be able to foster a sense of emotional, social, academic, and behavioral success for these students, but to do it with purpose, as well as really looking at that responsibility from a financial sense of cutting some of those costs versus the tuition. I'm going to bring Amy in here. Part of what when we look at creating our own program, we looked at how would we potentially support our own students while also being able to support local students from other districts. And we looked at how do we provide a tuition and be able to really make ourselves competitive in order to support our students, but also offer to other local districts a tuition-based seat, and that could help offset the cost of some of the program. So some of the assumptions that as we go through this and Amy talks is that we are currently setting a tuition rate of about $70,000. This is much reduced from our other from the other out-of-districts that are local to this, but also it's still competitive, and it allows us to really be a good partner to potential tuition students. And also other assumptions that Amy factored in is that it does really offset any change in the excess cost reimbursement. So the cost to educate our students in district would come down, which would we would not get as much back from an excess cost reimbursement standing. Okay, so I'm going to turn it to you to kind of walk us through the property and what the initial startup costs would be.
So this is the initial property proposal that we had put together and what the building will need compared to how much we thought it would cost. As you know, Mark is currently in negotiations on the property right now. Some work within the contract, some work potentially outside the contract. So until he finalizes those numbers, which we will have for the public hearing, this is what we're going off of as estimates to work into the program to see if there was any cost containment associated with this program. So essentially just shy of 1.6 million for the property purchase and all the renovations needed to get the property up and running for students to move in.
So in putting this proposal together, we looked at this in a phased approach in order to kind of utilize current resources and then to grow strategically into a full program with full capacity. The years on here were we really started this work over the summer. So the years you'll see are this year moving into next year. We now see this being next year moving into the following 2 years. But really phase one would be moving in with established current resources. We have a current in-district alternative education program over at Simsbury High School. It's the Pathways program. Our hope would be to identify students within that program that could use that more self-contained in-district program. They would kind of start our program as well as any other students identified as appropriate for that program at the high school level, utilize current staffing and really be able to start slow and build that exemplar high school classroom around our vision of creating this complex emotional disability clinically based program, and then do some of the vision work in order to be ready to expand into year 2. So year 1 would be utilizing current resources, allowing students in our current program to access this new environment and really benefit from this creation of a community. One of the number one pieces of having a successful out-of-district, in-district self-contained program is to create a community. And that's the goal here, is to have students in their community and to really build the community of the school. And then we would move... if you could talk to the financial piece for year 1.
So on the financial side, this would be fiscal year 25. So our special education gross budget, almost just shy of $17.5 million. So already budgeted for, good to go, fiscal year 25. And then we come into the building purchase, that $1.5 million. And then the cost to operate the building, had we purchased the building in fiscal year 25, we estimated about $50,000 for building supplies and utilities. And then since this would become a public facility, the loss of tax revenue would be about just shy of $15,000. So this is initial cost to the district of just over $1.6 million in year 1. So $17,496,000 budgeted, accounted for, unbudgeted piece $1.6 million.
Moving into year 2 or phase 2 of this, we would look to expand from 1 classroom into 2 classrooms. We would want to really go in from a secondary classroom into an elementary as well. So you'd utilize your current staffing that was used in year 1, and then you would add some additional staffing in order to create classroom 2. The hope would be that we could bring back up to 4 students that year and also start to bring in 1 to 2 tuition students, and really continue to carry on the exemplar of the secondary classroom and build your exemplar elementary classroom. Again, I can't reiterate the importance of moving slow in order to make this work, but you already will start to see in Amy's discussion of the finances the impact that just creating that second classroom will bring from a cost containment standing.
How certain are you on the row that was talking about just the staffing?
feel about that ratio of staffing to students?
It's good in the fact that it is more. It's very much adequate. I wouldn't say it's too much, and I wouldn't say by any means that it's not enough. So in looking at other programs, you can see here, if you look at that fourth bullet, we're looking at about 5 to 6 students per classroom. So you would add a teacher for that classroom. You would make sure that you have a full-time clinician in the building for your 2 classrooms. You'd have enough paraeducators for an elementary classroom. 2 to 3 paraeducators would be what I would be looking for, and you would have that contracted ability or financing to contract with a psychiatrist to add additional clinical support for the educational support of these students. So I feel very good with that level of staffing, and Amy can kind of talk to what that would come to from a financial aspect. But in regards to programming, I can program and support kids with that level of staffing.
So the clinician is serving both classrooms in here.
Yeah.
So is the clinician already on staff for year 1?
Year 1, we have currently a part of 0.5 of an FTE already dedicated to our pathways at the high school. So essentially, we would be keeping that for year 1. This is assuming that we might be able to give back that 0.5 to the high school. I think that's why I feel very good about this level of staffing, because there's even some buffers built in that could be discussed as we come down to what are the true needs of our students and where are we.
Is a clinician a social worker, a psychologist? Or what?
It is a social worker or a school psychologist. Either are certified to support the educational clinical needs of our students. So those are goals and objectives around social and emotional and behavioral well-being, building skills and strategies.
Novice question for you. Any pressure from state or otherwise that any of those ratios would change? Like is there anything that's being talked about to say you have to have 2 clinicians per X number of students or anything like that? Or do you, again, back to the durability of that ratio?
Yeah, no discussion from the state in regards to clinical ratios, or even from a teacher to student ratio for a small setting. I am not hearing anything there, and even if I were, I still feel that these are very appropriate. When I go into our out of districts, I've toured a lot of our partners. This is very fair to how they are staffed.
Great, thank you.
So moving on to the budgetary impact for phase 2. So you'll see on the top section there is our operating budget. So for fiscal year 26, this would be in this model. Our estimated budget without the program would be just shy of $18,500,000. So incorporated into this are some assumptions that we'd use for, say, supplies, which would be around 3%. But as you know that we talked during the budget, our tuitions are our main driver with these out-of-district placements. So we have seen over the last couple years, we have tuition increases anywhere from 8 to 18% a year. So the budgetary impact here is with a 10% increase on those tuitions. If you go down to the estimated budget with the program, you'll see it's just over 18 million. So included in those numbers are the same assumptions that we used without the program. The only thing we did is took back those 4 students that would move back in district. So we adjusted the tuition cost, and then we adjusted for our excess costs that we would lose as well. So then your savings, if you will, which I don't like to call it savings because in special ed things can change on a daily basis, and we could have another child come in that's worth $500,000 tomorrow. So our estimated savings or cost containment, if you will, in the operating budget would be about $438,000.
That number does not include any tuition received from
Not yet.
out-of-district students.
Yeah. So that's strictly our operating budget. We would see savings or cost containment, if you will, about $438,000. Now we have to pay for the program. So if you go down to the middle of the page, we have our program budget. So we're anticipated to get revenues, as you saw on the previous slide, of 1 to 2 tuition students at $70,000 each. So for the sake of being conservative, because that's my nature, I used $70,000 for only 1 tuition student, assuming we would only get 1, although likely more. On the estimated expenditure side, I put in there all of the expenditures that Katie just went through, so all of our staffing needs, our instructional supplies, building operations, things of that nature. So then the program is showing a deficit of $450,000. So what do? So we have to take our cost containment on the operating budget, we offset it with our deficit, on the program side, and our overall cost deficit in year two, is about $11,000. So even just having that one tuition student, like we're almost break even with the program. And then Katie will take you through phase 3 where we get the program fully built.
On that slide that we just saw,
Mm-hmm.
so we're proposing to charge $70,000 for out-of-district students. And the cost of running the program for our 4 students is $520,000. That's significantly more than $70,000 per student.
We would actually be programming for roughly 9 to 10 in-district students at that point for 5, because you have 2 classrooms.
Oh, I
Yep,
see.
so you have year 1, which is 5 or 6,
Yes, I forgot.
and then you would have
Right.
5 or 6 in year 2 added. So the total of the program growth in phase 2 is about 10 to 12 students for 2 classrooms.
So right now, are we paying the 70 to other towns, or like what's happening? Or that's
Pay more.
Right now, we pay substantially more. So in the first slide, that targeted group, we have 9 students in one approved special ed school where the total tuition per student is $96,200.
So apart from all other considerations, we're talking about reducing the cost of educating our own students from whatever it's going to be, which would likely be over $100,000 a year, to something between $50,000 and $60,000 a year.
and the 70 that we would charge. We feel comfortable that that's a durable number.
It's a very durable number to start with. I think it's something that certainly we can talk about, but I've been to other school district supported. So we do send a few students already to a similar type of program. And their tuition is right around that. I've been to other districts who have an in-house program such as this, and theirs is a little bit less. When you look at what districts such as ours are currently paying for a very similar program, it's competitive, but it also makes us a very good partner to local districts in order to get the tuition we need to run the right program, be competitive, but not feel like we are also causing a problem for our fellow districts.
Sure.
Neighboring districts.
Makes sense.
Okay. So phase 3 is really how do we build to full capacity? The hope into Farms Village Road, there is ample space for at least 4 total classrooms. For this program, we do see it having those 4 classrooms, 2 elementary, 1 middle, and 1 high, for a total enrollment of 20 to 25 students. The goal would be to be able to offer at least 10 tuitions and to bring back a total, an additional 6 out-of-district students in our completion of that 20 to 25. In phase 3, you would, this is kind of the full staffing model. So you remember in phase 2, we added a teacher, a clinician, 3 paras, and that contracted psychiatrist. You would add on top a supervisor, 2 additional teachers, 1 for each classroom that we're adding in phase 3, a speech and language pathologist, because again, those students within that program, they're going to need those related services, and beyond the clinical, the speech and language is the second most used service. You would add an additional clinician for 2 total clinicians to that program, and you would have 10 paraeducators in total. So an additional 7 paraeducators would be added in phase 3, and you would keep the contracted psychiatrist. This is really maximum program capacity that we would look at going. There is certainly some space in that building to do some small additional growth, but this is where I'd want to really start. Again, coming back to let's create a community, let's create that elementary, middle, and high school setting, and let's be able to really create a strong program with the right supports in place.
The total is 20 to 21, up to 10 is included in that, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so there would be, well, not quite, but almost two students per staff.
So you would have. So my goal would be that for our elementary classrooms, you would have a teacher and 2 to 3 paraeducators in that classroom. And for our secondary, it would be 1 teacher and 1 to 2 paraeducators, because as students get older, the hope is that they're more independent and don't require as much support. The clinicians, you would really see 1 being more of an elementary specialist, 1 being more of a secondary specialist. The speech and language pathologist would kind of cover the duration. So they'd all have their different roles. When you look at each individual classroom, the staffing would be the teacher and the paraeducator. So at the elementary, it would be 3 to 4 per class, which it would break into about if you had 6 students and 3 staff, it would be a 1 to 2 ratio. And these are students that when in a general education setting and were not successful, typically would have had pretty consistent adult support throughout their day. So this is by taking
one person assigned to them.
Yeah, and this is by creating a smaller environment where they're more successful. They actually need less adult support, because when you put them in a classroom with 20 other students, they're going to need that adult to really help them maintain and be of a support on a much more frequent basis than if they're in a milieu that is structured in a manner that can really allow them to practice their skills and strategies.
You may have just answered this. I apologize if I missed it in the answer. But they're not traditional classrooms. That's why there's not 4 teachers, right? So
Correct. I mean, they're classrooms in the sense that they're going to have a smaller structure. They're going to have a class. It's going to be a room, and that's going to be their home base. They might look different in the fact that they don't have desks, or they might, it's going to look.
I'm thinking more, why is there only 3 teachers but there's 4 classrooms?
Because 1 we've already had in our operating. We're still carrying through the pathways. So it really is 4 teachers. There would be 4 teachers in that building. 1 is currently in our operating now that we start year 1 with. In phase 2, we add 1, and in phase 3, we would need to add 2. It would be a 1-to-1 teacher per classroom.
So these are only the additional that are added in phase 3, or this? So that's not the full staffing numbers. That's just what's added in phase 3.
I think it's added in phases 2 and 3.
Yeah, the only thing that is missing from that full staffing list is the 1 teacher that carries over from our current operating.
But that's going to be in the numbers on the next
Yeah.
page. Okay.
When you started the presentation, you talked about 15 students who are out of district.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the total number of our students who are out of district now, or is it just these special?
This is that
particular-
niche of disability. We really hover right around 40 students. We've been very consistent with that over the last 3 or so years. So as Amy said, it can go up and down a little bit based on move-ins, move-outs, or students that come in back to district or go out, but right around 40.
But you're assuming that roughly 15 students in this niche, so that by phase 3, they're all being educated in our building.
Again, I have to caution that every decision is an individual decision. This doesn't assume that all 15 of those students come back, but it is we would like to see all of our students that are currently out of district eventually come back to their home district and be educated in their least restrictive environment. But those individual decisions will be made. The goal is that we build a program that is, and it is where they want to come back to, and we have those collaborative conversations.
But this model assumes 10 come back.
Katie, what is the range of tuition that we might see? And not every student who is out of district will be able to come back because the needs are greater than we can accommodate. But what is the range, just for the public, tuition that anywhere from top to?
So we have a few significantly high tuitions. We do have, I think our highest tuition is over $500,000 for 1 student for 1 year. We do have some students that are educated. I think the lower end of our tuitions, 60,000 would probably be on the lower end of our tuitions, and that is typically for students that require lesser support but can't be educated within district.
So this is an unfair question, but you talked about a student whose needs require services that cost $500,000. would some comparable student in your vision be eligible or be appropriate for education in this program when it's up and running?
No, a student with this is really for students who require therapeutic clinical day support, and is able to be, they can reach their academic goals. They require an environment that will support them from a clinical lens. Our students that are placed out of district have if you think of it on a continuum, a very large continuum of need, and the students with our highest tuition needs have significant complex needs that require, in order to meet our federal requirements under FAPE, it does create that high of a cost. And the schools that are supporting those students are built. That would be quite the undertaking to create a least restrictive environment, because they've collected students from across our state or other states that have that same degree of complexity. We don't have enough students in our district to create a program for that complexity of need, if that makes sense. This is a niche where we can grow a program and really be able to concentrate our resources appropriately and cost contain at the same time.
So we'll solve some of the problem and help children thrive for less dollars. Is that?
Yeah, and in a few slides, and maybe we jump there now, we have a very similar model in district right now. It's a similar population. It's Farmington Valley Transition Academy. And the Farmington Valley Transition Academy has been around. It's a collaborative between Simsbury and Farmington Public Schools since the early 2000s. And it services our students that are ages 18 to 22. So our students that are diploma eligible but need transition-based IEPs in order to enter adulthood. And it really is a proven model very similar to this. So it's for transition students only, ages 18 to 22, one population. We have grown it so that we actually have tuition-paying students from 10 districts. Our enrollment right now, so most years it's like 8 to 13. We have 18 students at FVTA right now. 18 students that if they were in an out-of-district transition program could cost us up to $100,000 each. But instead, we have our own program that is, by and large, when you look at the financials, it pays for itself in the fact that we are able to cost contain very well. And the budgetary slide there is right there. So if we did not have FVTA, you will see the fiscal cost that it would have been to Simsbury Public Schools on an annual basis versus what we paid. Some years we were not in deficit. Some years there was a very small margin of what we paid to educate those 8 to 19 students and what we were able to cost contain. I'm very cognizant to not use the word savings, as Amy described, cost contain, and in educating that population of students, the 18 to 22 students. And the best part of all of this is it makes sense financially, and our kids are happy. They're in their community. They are proud to go to Farmington Valley Transition Academy, and it's truly a bright spot in the work that I do and in the work that our special educators do and in Simsbury Public Schools.
That's one question I wanted you to have a chance to answer. Is you've talked about cost containment within this building, within this program for K through high school. But apart from that, I think you believe that the Simsbury kids will have a better experience if we do that. And maybe you can say a few words about that.
Yeah, I think if you really look at why to Farms Village, why do this work from something beyond the cost containment is our students are traveling up to an hour in order to get to their programs. Some of our students that are in the described niche of students are traveling into Manchester, Glastonbury. This allows us to really provide for current as well as future students an opportunity to be educated in their hometown. in their community. The location of Two Farms Village, it is next door to the high school. It does not prohibit us from doing transitions back to their building. Sometimes these students, the goal is never to change their environment and keep it that way forever. The goal is to have them be successful where they are in that moment, to learn skills and strategies, and to be able to access their peers as much as possible. And this allows us to open opportunities, to make those bridges, to build pathways, to really, I mean, not to be corny, but it's so true, right? Like, how do we really connect the dots for these kids in being successful in their education? Because a lot of them, to get to where they are, they had a tough time in their school. It was hard for them. They find success. What's a greater celebration than having them go back or come back to a school to go visit a teacher or go visit a principal and say, look at how good I'm doing now. And this would really provide that relationship, the community, and the ability to service them in a least restrictive environment as we're asked by law. So it's passionate work, and the right people can certainly do this for our students, and it makes sense too. I know, Amy, I jumped all around. You certainly have.
She followed.
It's okay.
She did a great job because I couldn't flip that fast. So phase 3, I know the budgetary impact.
So phase 3, this is our program that's fully built out. So the operating budget, again, we have an estimated budget without the program, with all the same cost escalators as we used in the phase 2 model. And our estimated operating budget, if we did not have the program, would be about $19,400,000. Then our estimated budget with the program, again, same cost escalators, except we have the full 10 students coming back into district. This is an operating budget savings of about $1.3 million. But of course, we still need to pay for the program, so that 1.3 is not full cost containment. You go down to halfway down the page again to the program budget, and now we're estimating we have our full 10 tuition students, which generates revenue of about $700,000. And then we have our fully built out expenditures for the program, which is just shy of $1.5 million. This gives you your estimated deficit for the program of $751,000. So if you take your estimated savings or cost containment on the operating side, and then you offset your estimated deficit for the program that year, your overall cost containment is $515,000.
Have you thought about sensitivity testing this in terms of what if those 10 tuitions don't actually occur and we just end up with more people in program in town? Because one of the things you hear a lot about our town, and you see it in the statistics, is we've got a great education system, right? So when you look at per capita, the number of students per our population, it's high. Some people say it's because you have such a good program, right? So this would argue, would that create an issue here? And if it did, because I know this then leads to a payback period, how much does that payback period, or does that benefit of the $500,000 a year change if it was all in town? You see what I'm saying?
So if we did not,
I think it's still a
benefit.
benefit. I just don't know if it turns into
Could it be
$100,000
bigger?
or
Could it be
$400,000. Could be bigger.
Could be bigger.
You're probably going to say it depends on the student, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really going to be, it's the crystal ball question. Is, are we going to see an influx in this population that requires us to put Simsbury kids in all of those seats?
Right.
I don't think we've done a ton of numbers with that. Again, I don't know certainly if we would see an influx, it's something we would have to talk about in regards to what that impact. But I think at the end of the day, it still would be at a cost containment approach that, let's say I have 2 more Simsbury students that require a clinical emotional disability type of program. I'm not sending them out. I'm not transporting them. So I might not be able to take those 2 tuitions, but that's the variability of special education budgeting. Is this would allow us to have a better way to control that spending, and meeting those needs. It would certainly have an impact on the ability to pay back that in duration.
And I guess where I'm going is, and I totally get that, and I realize you can't, get this to the penny. But I think as we think about a program like this, to me, coming from the business side, I think about it as a business, right, for a second. And I don't think we want to take that too far because we're talking about children's education here. But I'm trying to figure out if what you would say is, for example, if it was still $450,000 of overall cost containment per year, you might say, fine, who cares, right? Because your payback period is going to go from 4 or 5 years to 5 or 6 years, and it's all still good. But if it changed significantly, do you almost need to think about this as we have to be ready to scale the program? If it's that good, we always have to have a magic ratio of external versus internal so that it actually, again, for the taxpayers' purposes, it's putting us in a better financial situation. Again, I don't think a payback period changing by a year or two, to me, for an investment like this is a big impact. But if it were to change it if it was going to double the payback period, for example, I think it would be worth it. Maybe something for us to think about in terms of a sensitivity.
And that's something FETA has experienced. It has gradually grown over the years. So again, I commented that this building has some room to grow. And that is something that I think we would have to really have that conversation around balance is, does it make sense and when would it make sense to potentially add more staffing and another classroom in order to find that correct balance from the tuition piece versus supporting our students. So I go back to FETA because that's what I know and that's what has worked for us. As our students that required 18 to 22 education went up in both districts, we actually started to take in more tuitions. So again, at FETA, we now have about 42 students there. I want to say 10 years ago, it might have been closer to 25. So it's had growth over the years in its Simsbury and Farmington population, but also in our tuition population, if that makes sense.
Got it. It just might need us to be overt about making that happen, I guess, versus saying, "Oh, we filled the building with our own,"
Yeah.
and it created a different financial situation for our taxpayers.
And I think there's also capacity downstairs. If it did
Yes.
grow, we could build out the program further.
Yeah.
So if we had a bunch of Simsbury kids come back in or additional Simsbury students and we needed those tuitions, there's additional space downstairs that we could have to put for students
Got it.
And some land.
and some land.
Right. How much I don't know if I can ask this question now. How much of that land is buildable? It's a big
It
piece of land.
Yeah,
that
it was
goes with
interesting, came up briefly at the Board of Selectmen the other day. We do have a map that we could circulate by email. In the back, I'm told there's some wet spots, so
It looks like a
certainly,
huge piece of land that
Yeah.
I did. I just don't know how much of that is buildable.
I think the first third anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. On to the next slide, we looked at the long-term building maintenance. So if we were to purchase this property, we're assuming that there would be about $120,000 in investments needed in this building within the next 5 to 10 years. We're looking at some HVAC improvements within the next 5 years, and then over the next 10 years, we're potentially looking at some electrical upgrades and a roof replacement based on what our staff has looked at with the building.
Amy, let me ask you an ignorant question, which will embarrass me in front of all the numbers people.
I've already asked a bunch, so no.
The numbers we had for cost containment, we're talking right now about an upfront expenditure of $1.6 million. Is that anywhere in those cost containment figures, or
No,
so that's a
there-
sunk cost upfront
Right, and then I'll show you the return on investment in a future
okay.
slide. Yep.
return on it? That's what.
So if we did not purchase Two Farms Village Road, we're gonna have to do some internal maintenance to our modulars where our pathway program is currently housed, which Katie had mentioned earlier. Those modulars need to be replaced within the next 10 years, and 10 years is probably a stretch. They're not likely to last that long. They're being taped together right now. They have some heating issues at the moment. So anyways, if we had to replace those modulars, if we did not purchase this building, it would be about $1.3 million for the modulars itself, and then to add plumbing and sprinklers, it's estimated another $300,000. So your modular replacement is about $1.6 million. And then moving on to just an overall financial summary of the maintenance along with the operating. So you'll see that first column there is the budget year, and then at the bottom we have the property/maintenance costs, and then we have our operating budget previous slides, without the program. So over the course of the 3 years to get the program up and running, it's about $57 million. And then if we have our operating budget with the program, we have a total of about $56,659. So it's an overall cost containment of about $350,000, including the operating and the property/maintenance. So the property maintenance without the program, that $1.6 million is the modulars that we just looked at, and then the operating budget with the program is obviously the cost of the building and renovations that we would need. Moving on to Bert's slide, the return on investment slide. So I took our property purchase, about that $1.5 million, and then I just plugged in from year to year what our estimated cost containment would be. So year one, we were just purchasing the building, no program in effect other than our Pathways program that would move over to the space. Year two, we had that almost break-even year, was a slight deficit of $11,000. Year three, we had about $515,000. So if it decreased a little bit, year four, year five, we kept that cost containment at a modest $500,000. Your rate of return with the building purchase would be about 5.5 years. And then
That's the bottom line. If we go ahead with this, it'll pay for itself in 5 years.
yes.
I think more than that, because we avoid the 1.6 million on the replacement of the modules. Which are two parallel tracks, but I think that's an important footnote that we have there.
And then again, if we didn't purchase the property, the modular estimated cost of about $1.6 million, we would still need to replace the modulars, and of course, there's no return on investment with that.
Do we have any comparables? This is such a unique program. Do we have any comparables to say like a 5? Because to me, coming from the business world, a 5-year payback period is really good. Particularly when you think about the life of what this could mean. Is there any comparable on that?
I don't know.
There are other districts that have programs. A lot of them have used buildings that they already owned. They had vacant schools. So I haven't been able to do a direct comparison from a financial perspective. I think that's why we did then go into FETA as a comparable, because it's the one thing our district has been a part of that has always been successful from a cost containment. We didn't have upfront cost to purchase a building, but we've always been able to contain like the numbers that Amy showed you earlier. That's inclusive of our rent and all of our operating costs for the program to be up and running. So again, you are educating currently for the 23-24 school year, 17 Simsbury students at the cost of $100,000 to the district. That's really just some proven success of how a program like this works. And once it's up and running, it really is. It should be and is proven that it can kind of fund itself.
And when you get to that year 3, how many students are in the building again? I'm sorry.
Year 3, we look at 20 to 25 students.
And that was like the capacity without going into the extra room.
Yep.
Okay.
That's 4 classrooms. It easily has capacity for 5 to 6 classrooms.
Perfect. Thank you.
And then just to run through on the FETA, to say that we did, there is some estimated cost if we did not have the FETA program for the last 6 years. So starting fiscal year 19, it would have cost us about $950,000 to service the Simsbury students. What we actually paid because of this program is just shy of $30,000. So an overall cost containment in fiscal year 19 of about $925,000. Fiscal year 20, pretty much the same. Fiscal year 21, coming out of like the COVID year, or perhaps changes in enrollment, whatever happened during that year, again, it would have cost us about $937,000 to teach those students without this program, or to provide services to these students without the program. Simsbury paid $110,000, again, $826,000 in cost containment.
FETA stands for what?
Farmington Valley Transition Academy, and I can add in that 20/21 year coming out of COVID, we were down tuitions. Makes sense. To your point, that was a year where our tuition balance was a little off, and you can see it did impact us on that cost containment.
Sure.
Let's see. And then I just put together, worst case scenario slide. What would happen if things didn't go as we are intending in this type of model, or within some scope of the model that we just presented. We're looking at either an increased time to get our return on investment, say 5, 6, 7, 8 years, or we're still looking at the modulars at the high school that still need to be replaced at a similar cost. So if we have a building,
Why would we have to replace the modules once we acquire this building?
we wouldn't. I'm saying if we didn't, if we bought the building, and the program failed, we would still need the modulars, and in its place we'd use the building. So we wouldn't have to pay for the modulars. Value in having property adjacent to the high school.
But we would if we had to sell the building. I think the issue here from staff discussions was that if the program failed and you then had to sell the building,
I see.
you would. So a failure is we're out of this party. We're not just holding the building. Therefore, the slide is indicating we'd have to replace the modules.
That's a pretty drastic scenario.
It is.
Because now you're not even having anyone in town. I could see having it be all a drastic scenario to me is probably more it's all in town people and you don't quite get to the 20 or 25.
Tuition.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I don't see us being out of this game, as you said, or whatever, like out of this
Right.
business. I think we're always going to have a population in this room. So, but go ahead.
So the town obviously maintains the asset. There's space issues at most of our town buildings. The space could always be used, and of course, we could always sell the asset at any time.
A question for you guys: do you have a statistic? Because as I do the math, I'm a math guy, so bear with me. So it's $1.6 million to buy the building and do the upgrades and everything that we said. And there's 20 to 25 kids going to the building. My math is right. That's about $70,000 to $80,000 per kid that you're paying. Is there a ratio like that if you were to build a new? Because in some ways, I feel like there's a lot of chatter right now. Like, are we paying too much for this building? I feel like anytime you create an educational building, it's going to have to be customized, or you're going to have to build it from scratch, in which case you're going to be spending a lot of money versus a normal residential building or whatever it is. Do we have a sense as to what 70 or 80,000 per student looks like?
We didn't do. It's an interesting question. We didn't do analysis on building from new. But we were urged by our Board of Selectmen colleagues to make sure we did our due diligence on looking at other similar buildings throughout town that might offer an opportunity to do this. And involved in that discussion and research was how much would it cost to build out and what were all the ancillary costs with those other 3 or 4 alternatives. And putting aside for the moment that this property is right next to the high school, even without that.
Yeah, take that off for a
second. Take that off the table for this.
Although I think there's a hard cost in there because you might have less synergies of staff, but I'll leave that off.
Even if you leave that aside, this building far and away exceeded the other, certainly 2 that I'm most familiar with, and I think all 3 of the others. So we were confident as we started, and again, as was mentioned earlier, this I think first came down the pike in July, and a lot of the to the public review, at least as the public's become gradually aware of this, we were continuing on the staff side to do due diligence about the properties. There's one thing we didn't do is look at the cost to build new. I can only assume that that's probably a bias because my own sense is that building new would be exorbitant. I mean, just out of the question. So I didn't ask our town engineers and building folks to take a look at what would it be and where
it would
would
even
we
be interesting. It's not apples to apples to take the what we paid for Latimer improvements
For
divided
Latimer.
by the number of students.
Yeah. And we could certainly do that.
Because I'm guessing that's a low. I'm guessing this is
It's
a low
gotta
number.
be.
And I'm not saying that to defend the price of 1.6. I'm saying it just to give context to
Right.
if we overpaid by $100,000, which would be a pretty big percentage.
Well, this was my
What does
point.
it actually mean to the
Right.
to the? Now you can put in all the intangibles around.
So we have some quick math back here going on.
Board of Ed did all the math.
Right, if we look at Latimer, that was an upgrade to an existing structure.
Sure, yeah. Not apples to apples.
Right,
But, yeah.
roughly 34 million.
Yep.
And I think we have about 450 students. I may be wrong on the numbers here, which is about 75,500 and change per student to upgrade an
That was
existing
upgrade, yep.
facility.
Yep.
So,
Useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you.
We won't check your math.
Sounds right.
And then these last couple slides are some other properties that Katie had visited and just kind of taken
so we looked at several different. I had the opportunity to help find a new location for our Farmington Valley Transition Academy. Was familiar with a few buildings in town. The town, Mark had suggested a few. We were all able to get in there. Tom Roy from the building side was able to get in there. And, we just listed kind of the benefits or some of the concerns we had with each of those. In regards to continued cost containment, given the location, I know but it is next to the high school. And that does help us from a transportation aspect, that there can be shared transportation. You have probably seen our vans from Salters that transport some of our kids with needs, and every time we run a van, that is another van that we can't use to take students to where they are currently. So the more vans we need, the harder it is and the higher the cost is. So this allows us to do some shared van rides with the high school. The time works. It's also central in town. So it helps from a transportation, it helps from a nutrition services aspect, and also some of the shared staffing that had been mentioned. So everything in regards to renovation as well as layout and some of the additional appropriateness is listed in here, but it was. I do feel that we've really thought through some additional properties in town. Other questions?
I have a question. I mean, I had an opportunity with Art earlier on to kind of look through the costing and really poke at some of the assumptions, and I was very pleased with the 5 years, and it seemed fast. So we poked at a lot of things. What I'm confused about, and I don't know what slide it was on, probably 30 slides earlier. I've got all different information here. I know there's a bunch of memos in our package from all different dates. So some numbers are old, some numbers are updated. One says 24,000 for painting, one says 89,000 for painting, one says 700 for the building, one says 900 for the building, one says 600 for the building. Where do we get to the 1.6? Could you just walk through that again? Because I don't know what the right number is.
I think all along I appreciate the question. The chair and I were talking about this just before the meeting. We've been pretty drilled into the 1.6 number since early on in the process, actually. So as we sit here now, as we get further along in the approvals process, I'm actually a little surprised that number has held up as well as it is. There's been some discussion about, is it 1.6 or can we be in there for a little lower, and what should we be in front of you tonight asking for? At the Board of Selectmen, my purpose in that setting was to get authorization to enter into the contract of purchase and sale, and the resulting resolution from the Board of Selectmen authorized a purchase price inclusive of some of the work to be done pre-closing of not more than $1 million. What you've seen evolving and the numbers that have been shifting have been that what I refer to as Schedule A, which is the work that we would want done pre-closing by the current owner as a condition of sale. And so I don't want to confuse the board, but on the programming side, you've got phase 1, 2, 3. In my mind, you have phases 1 and 2, which is the build out. And so we've divided that into pre-closing work that would be done by the current owner as a condition of sale, i.e. we do not purchase the building or close until that work is completed. And we've got authorization from the BOS to not exceed $1 million. That includes the purchase price, which is penciled in at $625, and the difference, which was just around $997,000, is for work to be our payment to be included in the purchase price for work done pre-closing. The 1.6 number is inclusive of everything, so there's an additional $600,000 that, as again, this has evolved, and we're all hearing it essentially for the first time, but the 600 would be supplemental to the 1 million that was authorized by the Board of Selectmen. I think what's important for tonight is that the 1.6 number may be slightly lower. There is work ongoing to get that number a little better. We got some answers about the elevator and the lift, which I'm happy to share with the board. If you'd like to get into that, or I can save it for the public hearing, but just to indicate that that work is ongoing. So again, as part of the negotiation with the seller, the amount of work and the cost of the work that they would do pre-closing was a subject of negotiation. And what you see is, generally speaking, my reporting to the Board of Selectmen and other stakeholders how those discussions were going. And that was why we framed the motion for the Board of Selectmen as a not to exceed. Tom Roy, myself, Board of Ed, and the seller have a meeting scheduled for Friday to hammer this out before we get into contract. With the town attorney, we'll get all that finalized, and then what we'll present in time for the public hearing is that line between pre-closing work and post-closing work. And we'll also have a better total on the 1.6. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder, but I don't think it's going up. I think we're pretty confident that we're coming to you tonight with a number that makes sense, a number that we're not going to ask for additional funding for. And that was also our strategy at the Board of Selectmen. Give them the top end number and don't exceed that number, and then work right up to the last minute to make sure that we've got the best financial structure to present to you and to the public.
Amy, could you just go back to that?
Slide 6, I believe.
Thank you. So the 712 isn't the purchase price; it's the appraised price, right? You're just using that as a proxy.
In the offer on the table right now, is $625 on the purchase price.
Okay.
How do you guys feel about each of the pieces? Because I almost like we've done like a top down. This kind of makes sense. 5.5 years payback, all that kind of stuff. The chatter I hear from people in town is more like, are we paying too much for this?
Yeah.
So how do you feel broadly about each of those pieces? Right, like people come to me and say, "Geez, the price per square foot that we're paying for this is like unbelievable relative to what comparables would go for." And then you hear the $80,000 for painting and things like that. Like, in an attempt to not go and nitpick you on every single one of these, because I'm not qualified to actually do that. How do you feel about each of those pieces that like they've been scrutinized appropriately to say, "Yep, we actually had a benchmark on this, and we're not paying the painter more than I don't even know what you pay a painter, $40 an hour, and we're not paying we're not paying more than X square feet." Because to me, like that's the linchpin of this, because all the other math makes sense.
Right.
It's really like, can we feel good to our taxpayers and even the 1.6 in the end, it feels like you can defend that and say, geez, to put a building used for educational purposes, and at that probably a higher special needs purpose. So the ratio of a need for an elevator and those types of things is higher per student. So it feels like it makes a lot of sense top down. I feel like it's missing the bottom up to say each of those pieces is actually okay.
And that's the piece that we're, good question, and we are continuing to work on that. In fact, it was one of the members of the Board of Selectmen that raised that issue, and the painting is probably the poster child for what shouldn't be there.
Okay.
And won't be there by the time this takes final form, which was why, in the interest of time and expediency, we presented this as a not to exceed number, but we're very cognizant of that as well. The elevator is off the table, which is $350, and we're now told that can be a lift, which is, Katie, is there a number on that? 90?
It's about 80.
I'm going to say it's about 90,000 just to be safe, as I don't have that in front of me. So there's a savings there relative to that number. But my point is, same thing for the painting, 88,000. If I had had my druthers now looking back, and again, no process is ever perfect, but I might not have put out estimates ahead of our finalizing those numbers. But I wanted to demonstrate to my board, at the Board of Selectmen, that we're looking at this list of work that we think that they could do pre-ownership. And I would just make one final point, and that is that, and the town attorney has confirmed this, I believe, for your board as well as for the Board of Selectmen. But since we don't own the building, there should be an expectation that it would be cheaper, not more expensive. And Tom Roy and I are meeting with them Friday to make sure that there is a comfort level, not just on the 1.6, but on every one of those lines. And if there isn't, we just take the line out and we move it to my phase 2, which is we'll do it ourselves after closing, right? And
I just want to finish my question, because I don't think I got the. So I feel like we're backing into this 1.6, and we're moving stuff around, and we're always getting to the 1.6 no matter what we're doing. I mean, and I know I'm using painting as an example because I saw 24, I see 88, and I don't even see it on here. Is that general fit out? Like, are we off by 90,000? Like, I don't know what the numbers are, and other than saying, yeah, it's 1.6, and we'll figure out how it adds up.
The direct answer is that we've always assumed, based on our analysis, that it was 1.6. If the owner can perform certain pieces of work at a lower cost than we could after closing, then we would ask the owner to do that, save taxpayers some money, and the owner would also make some money on that element of this transaction, right? That's why there is a purchase price written on and a not to exceed price that includes some of the work. What the exact work being done prior to closing, as opposed to work we'll do, is dependent on our satisfaction to these numbers as was raised by your member.
So these different line items,
Could
many
change.
of them are potentially jobs that would be performed by the owner pre-close. All of
So some we know are we're in agreement already. We have been working on this, like the fiber data wiring is pretty clearly something that they would do. The fire alarm system is right in their bailiwick. I had a conversation with Mr. Roy today about a couple of things that are not on the list that the school may want to be on the list, and so we're going to make sure that we've had an opportunity to get back to that conversation just to make sure we've got this right. Again, not to exceed 1.6, nor to exceed 1 million in terms of the acquisition. I think one other follow-up on the question here was that obviously including some of the renovation work pre-closing drives up the per square foot cost. So the value of what we're asking them to do, we have to be clear that for each of those work items, it's less than the cost we would get if we bid it ourselves. And that's what we're committing to continue to work prior to your vote.
What is the square footage of the building?
20,
200.
is it 20, are you including the downstairs was 20?
I think when
I thought it was 24.
2,200?
That sounds right, Chair.
It's 4,200.
Per square foot?
For what do you want me to use for the price? 1.6?
1,600. Yeah, 1.6.
1.6.
I'm saying 2,200.
2145.
$700 plus per square foot, it's like $725 per square foot. Now, that's a. So again, this is where I go on both sides of this, and I think whoever's point it was is like, what's the actual purchase price is important because you probably can't think of this relative to a normal piece of commercial. You got to think about this relative to a piece of education property, right? With a lift, with whatever else, special fire alarm, security, whatever else is being mandated.
I agree with that 100%.
I don't know what to gauge it off of.
feel
That's
like-
why the Latimer
feel like
ratio might be the
no
only one we have
more
to
than this, no more than this, no more than this, but
That's
you say we have the 1.6 and we're like filling stuff in underneath.
Sorry,
Yeah.
everybody. 4,400 square feet is all in. I was reading the appraisal good correct.
Is that like above grade? Like
Yeah.
is that,
They had it broken out.
it looks more like a 4,400 square foot
Yeah.
building than it does a
Yeah.
4,200.
There's
4,450
obviously
above grade.
Yes.
44.
Well, I mean that's gonna like divide by 2 then, right?
Well, you're still high, but yes. I mean, your point is that
360.
the purchase price is 625, absent all the work.
And is that common to have a contract that includes the purchase price and another 50% more of
Well, it's not uncommon, and we had this discussion, on behalf of the Board of Selectmen with the town attorney, and his language was specific. It's not uncommon at all to have certain renovations made by the owner. So the current building owner wants to sell it to the town of Simsbury. This is what's required by the town of Simsbury to give it the value that we're assessing it as. And so as part of our negotiations, we really have a unique opportunity to negotiate just the purchase price, but also some of the work that needs to be done.
So it would be odd though, I've only purchased residential property, but it would be odd to buy a piece of property and then spend 50% of the seller do 50% of the value and work back, unless
Unless
there
it would
was a
save
massive
you money.
issue and it was going to save you money.
And that's the key, is if it saves taxpayer money, because post-closing, the cost to do the work are 15% higher for
So
a number
are
of
you
reasons.
getting competing bids
We
on
are.
each of these? Okay,
Not on every item, but on the top 3 or 4 or 5 items.
which make up the
That
majority.
make
of
up the vast majority. Now, after comments made at the Board of Selectmen, we'll be going back and repricing the ones that we didn't, because the original look was get 80% of the money and you don't have to worry about but the comments were made about painting, so we're gonna go and get those numbers.
Wendy, did you have a
I
comment?
just wanted to add a little context to kind of go along with what Todd was asking, and for anybody who didn't sit through our meeting the other night, a couple of things that we did ask for. There was a little discomfort with the overall plan because a lot of, I would say I was in favor of, could we just buy the building and do the work ourselves later so that we could stagger the costs? And I asked, put Mark on the spot, and I asked him at the meeting, is this the only way we could have this deal made, is by merging all the costs, and if this was a good deal? And the answer was yes. So I took that. The other thing that I considered and brought up was making sure that before we sign anything, there's a plan A, plan B. Plan A being up to the $1 million, including the purchase and the work being done by Gerard, with some form of schedule of these costs, right? And then Plan B, it's really not Plan B, 1A, is the 600 or less of the other items that we need, maybe a lift, maybe an elevator, and making sure the BOE is good with those items, so we know what we're getting from Gerard and we know what we will get next, right? So those are the two things that I brought up. And then the other question already came up was, because it will be a municipal building, but it's not currently a municipal building. Bob's just going to do this so I could sleep at night. We won't get hit later by any state things because it is a municipal building and we didn't follow prevailing wage or anything like that, because we ran into that somewhere else. But we own the property there, so he said it shouldn't happen here. But we did, we all had concerns, but we all got behind it in the holistic picture of what was happening here, and the fact that we will see these numbers in the breakout. I think that sums up what we said.
That's a very fair assessment. I agree entirely, and I appreciate all the work that certainly the Board of Selectmen and all 6 of them did, even those that voted in opposition. I think that the proposal in front of you tonight has been made better by all the work that's gone on since it was first discussed back in July. And certainly the superintendent and Katie and their team have done a tremendous job with Amy on giving you the presentation you have tonight. My role has been, just as the lead negotiator for this. I can just speak to that for just a moment to give you some comfort with respect to the way we set this up. The independent appraisal came in at 712. Relatively irrelevant, but it wasn't that long ago that there was an appraisal for 990. Putting that aside for the moment, the 712 independent appraisal sets a price roughly 90,000 higher than I did as part of my negotiations. But had I tried to bring that to the Board of Selectmen, a purchase price of $625 without any of this work, I wouldn't be able to get us into contract because the Gerards would not agree. And there'd be no agreement. And so what we needed to do was let them have a shot at looking at some of the pre-closing work. Nobody's saying that they might not make a little money on that, but the key is for the town. What would the cost be to the taxpayers of any of the work that was done? And as long as they can get some of these key things done for a lower cost, that's what we worked on. As a result of that, we've determined that we don't actually need the elevator, which has been a big help, and the lift is, as I said, $180,000 less than that. And we've also identified some work that is quite clearly in their bailiwick, where we expect that their price would continue to be lower than anything that we could do.
So you said they wouldn't agree to the purchase price?
There was no way to a purchase price for $625.
They would only agree to it if they themselves were paid to do the additional work?
If they had an opportunity to do some of this work, it had the additional impact to them of making it a deal that they could live with as well. So all of this was a negotiated arrangement with them that, and again, we're not in contract yet until we work out those deals to the satisfaction of the board.
I would just feel more comfortable if when we get to the end that like this exhibit that we got passed out, this one and the numbers in the contract are all balanceable. Because right now, I can't really tell. It just, like I said, it just kind of seems like we're plugging in to get to the 1.59.
We don't have anything.
This does have the land purchase at 712, not 625 on the thing you submitted to us.
We'll make that correction.
And for all the, because it sounds fishy, right? Like I'm not going to sell this to you unless I get to do the fixes myself.
No,
So,
actually,
like, I guess-
it wasn't like they were holding a gun to our head at this, but we were far apart on the.
And I get it. I'm not. And whoever's look, if you're negotiating, someone smart has to sort of make that call. But is it safe to say? I think this is what you were saying. Because I guess there's two things that would get me comfortable. Is I think that it's yes to at least one of these. Is all the major work we're going to get a competing bid of some sort. So we could tell the taxpayers, yes, they wanted to do the work. We made sure it was cost effective.
Correct.
Then the second thing is, are we going to have somebody inspect this work when it's done to
Yes.
ensure that it's
There'll be a walkthrough as there would with any, and that work has to be done to our satisfaction, to the specs of the company.
and this is like a professional walkthrough
Yeah.
because they're messing around with like fire alarms and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Those two are yeses.
Okay.
This is a question for Jeff. Jeff, and Katie, do the project's costs and specs meet the entirety of your need, or will you be coming back to us?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry. Do the total costs and specs that we've been presented or that will be finalized meet your needs? And the entirety, we did see the out years, other than the maintenance that will come with the normal thing, but is that satisfactory to you? You've reviewed all this and comfortable with what you've seen so far?
I would say I think we're comfortable with it today, right? I mean, I think Wendy's point is a good one, right? I want to see, as the chairman of the Board of Education, I want to see the list of what those renovations will be. So we are comfortable with it. I mean, would you?
And I would just add from from my perspective and being able to facilitate a program and be in compliance with what we have to do. This meets that. You can see there's the contingencies. We've already this is inclusive of furniture. This is inclusive of everything we would need to be put in that building that we don't already have. So that is something we've talked about and is included in these items.
And I did, I'll inform the board, I did speak with Bob DiCrescenzo earlier about the prevailing wage issue, and he's gonna have something for us, to Wendy's point, just to confirm in writing that we are in compliance, although his initial evaluation is that we are. The first 1 million and the improvements in there will not need to comply with prevailing wage because they'll be done by someone who doesn't own the property. The subsequent 600,000, once we own it, will need to comply, which is the cost differential that I think we've been discussing there. So that's part of the analysis that we'll be looking at, and we'll have something in writing for it.
To your point in your email earlier, just to confirm for the public, all of that will be competitively bid in the normal course as well. So post-closing, as soon as we close, we know whatever hasn't been done, that's going out to bid immediately.
So there's no commitment, or there's been no side promises that Gerard will get the 600,000.
None whatsoever.
It will be whoever comes in with the right price at that point. It's just like we normally do on procedure. Okay. A couple of things in terms of funding. I did want to give this board a heads up. There is a small chance, although talking with Mark, I don't think it's a likely chance that we may need to hold a special hearing to adjust if we approve. From what I'm hearing, I think we will approve the motion to go to public hearing. And here's the reason why. The Board of Selectmen approved an appropriation not to exceed $1 million, subject to the conditions that Wendy outlined to us. So it'll be on them to make sure that Mark and Bob negotiate according to the requirements that they've imposed, such as the outlining of what's been done, the costs that have been competitively bid, and all that. So that's not our job to make sure that will fall on the Board of Selectmen to make sure that happens. because of that, we cannot approve an appropriation of 1.6 million because the charter requires us to only approve those appropriations that have come to us upon the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen. So at this point, the recommendation is 1 million. So then what that means, the timing of the 600,000, how do we do that? Our board has indicated a desire not to do a second supplemental appropriation. If we're going to do an appropriation, do it all at once. So the other option would be, okay, and we talking with Jeff, who had consulted with Matt, can we approve the second part as part of the budget? And if we do that, that goes to referendum. The public then will have an opportunity to vote on it. If we do that, we'll have Amy look at, should we use capital reserves for that second 600? Should we bond for it? Amy's going to go through the fiscal analysis and have that ready for us in February. The question I posed to Bob is, okay, well, what if they need to start earlier, right? We go to referendum, the next budget doesn't start till July 1. Is that going to delay the start of school? So Bob was able to confirm for me today that if it passes referendum, say May 15th, work can begin May 16th. And it will be almost like an intergovernmental loan. And then once the appropriation comes in on July 1, it would then be paid back. And Amy has confirmed that that works with our auditor and through the accounting. So it works both legally and accounting. So that would enable us to move the ball. If work needs to begin before May 5th, that's when we would do a second supplemental, because we'd have to get the notice approved for 1.6 million. So we don't think that's going to happen, but as you guys are negotiating timing, that's going to have to do with Matt and Tom Roy and you and how we set the contract. But I did want to just let folks know that's sort of how the progression will go. Wendy?
I do have a question, because look, so does that mean, are you saying if we do this million, everybody agrees, it passes, we do the up to $1 million supplemental, we can't use that until the 600 is approved?
No, you could
So we could, if we do it in the two phases that you're saying, the 1 million soon and the 600 part of the budget, we could still start the project, right, with the 1 million, and then
well, we would purchase the property
and
as
do
completed.
that work, right? So that's still, yeah.
The Gerard would do that work. We
Yeah.
can start the phase 2 600 until it passes with the budget. So
Right.
yes, there is a element of, does the budget pass? I think there's a commitment
Yeah.
on this board. It would not be its own separate item because it falls below the threshold. So it would be part of the total budget. So if this is a top priority for the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen, if the budget overall doesn't pass, something would need to be cut. This would be on the low list because it has the potential to generate a profit and cost containment in the future. So in terms of our hierarchy of needs, it would be low on the cutting list should the budget fail at that point. And it would not require a separate question on the referendum because it's below the 2% that would trigger the referendum question. So it'd be like any other project, like highway paving. We would vote, shall the board approve the capital projects, and it would be on there. So that would be the only sort of hesitancy or unknown. Is it a high risk? No, it's a low risk because the budget is obviously like.
And Chair, what's the alternative to that? Well, let's pretend we said we don't want that risk.
So the alternative would be the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen holds a special meeting and they say, you know what, we're going to go ahead up to authorize 1.6 million. That's the recommendation to the Board of Finance.
And that allows us to.
The Board of Finance holds a special meeting and says, okay, let's approve, notice
Gotcha.
the hearing at 1.6, and then we approve the 1.6 in total
Makes sense.
appropriation. I think both are doable. That's not that hard to hold a special meeting by Zoom. Very easy to do.
Apart from the additional meetings, why isn't that a better solution?
I think that's. Mark, would you like to speak to that?
And the public, while you're thinking about that, Mark, the public has a shot at hearing all of that, obviously through all of this, either way. So there's no difference to the public because they're going to have a shot at hearing it and showing up to the meeting and forcing our.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only slight thing is that the public does vote at referendum for the total budget, but they don't vote specifically for this project because it's below the threshold, so.
To your point, Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to answer that question, I think that that's the preferable process rather than having another meeting. I think the opportunity to engage with the publisher about this, even though it's the 600 after the million, it's still an important dialogue and an ability for all of us to say the public gets a chance to weigh in. I mean,
But we're gonna be talking about the total cost. I mean, we're gonna have a public hearing and hear from the public about the total cost. We're not gonna pretend it's one thing or another.
no.
And if we put it in the referendum, just as $600,000 after we've sunk $1 million in the project, how realistic is it that, I mean, and as Lisa just said, at the end of the process, if the referendum voted against the budget, we would still likely include it in whatever future budget we prepare. So I don't see why we wouldn't have the public have a meeting about the entire project and ask the public to comment on that rather than break it up and create these contingencies. But maybe I'm wrong about that.
I got a quick question. Would that create the same confusion? Remember last year? I'm not. I like where it is. Like first of all, I would say that we had originally wanted this. Wondered why this just couldn't be part of the budget. Why we're doing it now? Because it's progressed from August to now, but we've agreed to do it, right? But I was thinking, is it similar to all the rigmarole we had to do last year when we? And Amy could answer this, like for the bridge or for the PAC, we had some money put aside and we had to explain that we were adding money to it, and everybody was thinking we were spending $2-something million for the bridge, but we had already spent 1.9, if you guys remember that.
Yeah.
So would this fall into that and create that same confusion, I guess goes
The answer is yes, but you have the capacity to explain. So when it comes to us in the CIP, if it were to come to us at like this, it would show 2025, 1 million, and 2026, 600,000. So the total would still be the 1.6. It would just, right now it's showing it all in year 2025. If we do it through referendum, 2025 is this year, referendum is 2026. So it'd be broken up. It would just show it that way. The total cost would remain the same. It's just the funding mechanism would be over 2 years. So that's why this sheet is really important. It's an important communication piece because it shows the public how we're funding it. One of the things, I don't think we have to decide that right now. We cannot approve the 1.6. We can only approve the 1 because that's all that's been recommended to us. If there is, a strong desire, we'll ask you certainly to consult with Bob, and if you want to make that change and bring it to us. I mean, to Bert's point, there is some simplicity to that. It's one and done. It's totally approved. We don't have to deal with the confusion. It's one explanation. So I'm open to both. I think we can approve it though as is, since we can't do 1.6 right now, and leave that to a further discussion. If it never comes to us for 1.6, that's where it is.
So do you still have the public hearing next week?
We would do that in February.
Or whatever, February.
And if you decide to make a change, we could still do it in February. Just have your special meeting early enough so that we can act, so that you can notice it in the paper. The hearing is not technically required by the charter. We are doing it though because it is such a large number. We have said from the get-go, we want to make sure that we're being super transparent, that the public knows how we're spending the money. It is the largest supplemental appropriation without grant funding that I can recall doing. So we want to and with the lack of newspapers, we want to make sure that the public has adequate notice. And Mark has assured us, and I'm sure the Board of Ed as well, to help us get information out so that the public knows.
I think it's really important for the public to understand, at least at a high level, what Katie was saying. Because now we're talking about the price of the building. Different issue. I'm totally convinced. Something that my time on the Board of Ed, we talked about those kind of things. And to me, just keeping children in district has a huge benefit that doesn't even have a dollar associated with that. But the dollars and cents associated with purchasing the building is a very different issue.
And Chair, if I may, you had asked, I don't know if you told your colleagues, but I did make a note on Friday's meeting. You asked that we set up a web page and get all of these things specifically on one spot in the website, so that we could refer to it if we've got public asking questions about some of the numbers that have changed, or just one place that we can point to. And certainly we can link to tonight's presentation by Katie and Amy, which I think the public would really, those who didn't watch live, would love to see.
And it was excellent. I didn't get, I should have led with that. Thank you.
Very
both.
good.
It was very, very impressive by you both. I think to Art's point, the question is, are you comfortable with this purchase price? And we weren't involved in the negotiations. Is it ideal? I don't know. But I do know that the numbers, based on what we know today and the estimates, do work. Not only do the numbers work, but to Todd's point, it's better for our children. They will get better services closer to home. For the taxpayer, at a dollar value that's less than what we would have to pay if they went out of district. So that math from the Board of Finance perspective for me works very well, and it's very, very strong reason to do that. We're facing, for members of the public who may be watching, we were informed that the state is just withholding $400,000 that we are entitled to, that we were promised to reimburse for these costs. So there is an urgent need for us to take action at the local level to do what we can to contain costs. This is a very creative initiative. It required the coordination of both the Board of Ed, the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, staff from all the groups, and I just appreciate the effort that everyone put into working together to move this to a point where I think we're ready to take a vote on whether to hold a hearing for members of the public. We are not voting to approve that. We will hear what the public has
You
to
could do
say.
that too if you want. I mean, while we're here, come on.
Are we ready for that motion?
I think we are. I just want to read the notice that will go in the paper just so that folks have an idea. This is run, and it'll be, again, Mark, just run it before you put it out just by council to make sure we properly notice it. There'll be notices given pursuant to Title 7, Chapter 99, Section 7191 of the Connecticut General Statutes and Section 404 of the Charter of the Town of Simsbury, that the Board of Finance will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, February 18th. Amy, is that correct? 2025 at 5:45 in the main meeting room of the Town of Simsbury, 933 Hot Meadow Street, Connecticut 06070, to receive public comment concerning a proposed supplemental appropriation for the town purchase of real property located at 2 Farms Village Road, referencing the lot number, inclusive of certain renovations required to be completed by the current owner prior to closing and other conditions that may be imposed by the Board of Selectmen, in an amount not to exceed $1 million to be funded with cash. Is that correct, Amy? That one? It'll likely come from capital reserves. That will be a topic of discussion for us in February. A copy of the proposal can be found on the town's website, and there'll be a link to where that can be found. Alternatively, members of the public may email statements and that will be filled in so that we can receive statements from the public by 12 p.m. on Tuesday, February 18th, to have their comments sent to the Board of Finance. Written comments will not be read into the record of the hearing. Information on the proposed purchase may be found on the town's website and hard copies will be available at the town clerk's office. And this, unfortunately, the Farmington Valley Press closed, so it will go through the current, which requires a little bit more leeway to get it in there. So if people are comfortable with that.
Yeah, well, so to the point we were discussing a moment ago, we're talking about holding this hearing so that the public is fully appraised of the proposal, the expenditure, what we're planning to do. But this notice says we're not going to spend more than $1 million.
For
And
this
we're proposing
supplement.
but we're proposing to conduct a hearing. I understand the difference. If this is a supplemental and there's an additional $600,000, but what we're going to do is conduct a public hearing in which we say, by the way, before you stand up and start yelling at us about the $1 million, there's another $600,000 coming down the pipe. And I think that's a little problematic.
So with the consent of this board, can you work with Bob to put in the full total price into the notice hearing of 1.6?
I mean, we could still say $1 million here and reference the anticipation of $600,000.
I'd be more comfortable doing that if the chair doesn't have any objection.
I have no objection.
So I would work with the town attorney to add that and clarification it. So actually in the notice, you'd see both numbers.
Right.
If that's acceptable to the board, we'll get that done early tomorrow and get this to the current by midday.
Perfect.
Thank you, Chair.
So does that have to come back to us then? Okay.
This is one that's our hearing, because it's not approving the 600,000, it's just
Including that it's coming.
anticipated, however,
And an anticipated further 600,000.
For a total cost.
And we're saying it probably is not gonna be 600,
Right.
there's no $350,000
Well, not
elevator,
more than 600.
right?
what we'll do is we're gonna let council work on that one rather than us.
Not
'cause-
to exceed. It's what I did with it yesterday.
Right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna let council work on that, I think we've given enough guidance to the town manager that we wanna make sure the public's on notice that this is phase one, even if you use the term phase one of a two-phase project, however council recommends, we'll go with that.
If we haven't formalized the 1.6 and we think they're gonna save 200,000 on the elevator, should we already call it 1.4? I mean, I'll leave that up to you guys. It just makes the conversation a heck of a lot easier and it's more transparent to the taxpayers to go where we think we're gonna go. Than to leave it at 1.6 and then it looks like, well, we might save it here, and I think Todd, it was to your point, we're gonna save it here, we're gonna give it back there, versus like actually having it systematically go down. You guys have to be comfortable doing
Let
that,
me
so I'm
just
not
check
trying to
with
force
the
your hand.
team. You okay with that, Katie?
Yes,
On the
as long
board
as we
side?
get that confirmation today.
You good with that? We can commit to 1.4.
Okay,
That's great.
so
happens when you ask a
congratulations.
question?
I'm gonna leave.
For saving $200,000.
I hear 1.6.
Amy's the only one that's conservative. I but I think we I mean, to your point earlier, we're still working on this, comfortable at 1.4, and still have a little bit of work to do to get there. Again, we're just before you tonight to ask you to set the public hearing and keep us rolling. So
If I ask you to get it down to 1.2, can you?
Very easy to jump in at that.
You would do that for art,
I already
right?
got a lower number, Bert, I got you.
Very easy to jump
fortunately,
in.
we have enough room in CIP to
I'm
add the
listening to you,
600.
Todd.
Todd?
Well, I was going to say something nice, but it's very easy to jump in at the 11th hour and say, "Why'd you do this? Why'd you do this? Why'd you do this?" But I know a lot of work went into this, and it's more than just the numbers on the page. So I appreciate the amount of work, and you can see the evolution of what you've done in the packet. So I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
For
Appreciate
all the teams. I
team
know
effort.
this has been a lot of work and something that people have been thinking about for a long time.
So we
And to-
have, Mike, are you on with us? We have Mike?
I love
Sorry, I
seeing.
was on mute. I'm still here in the, maybe for maybe less than 1.6 million, we could get a better conference solution.
I hear you, Mike.
Really almost impossible to hear you guys. One thing that I haven't heard, and I haven't heard a lot, and I've been trying to keep up with you guys on SCTV. Thank you very much, Simsbury Media, for that. It's about a 40-second delay. So trying to keep one ear into the conversation and another on what you guys are actually saying has been very challenging. We are negatively impacting the grand list. And by Gerard's numbers, $1 million, which I disagree with, or 625, or whatever the number is, there's some magic there that I got only a part of. And so that's going to negatively impact our tax revenues, right? Not by a huge number, but I'm not sure if that's at all been accounted for. But it'll be interesting to see how all of this plays out.
Yeah, Amy can answer that.
That we have.
Mike, it's Mark Nelson. We did account for approximately 15,000 in lost tax revenue on an annual basis. So we did capture that, and it was carried forward in the slides.
But thank you for pointing that out. That's right. It is a loss of revenues, and we should not be.
That was when we went through the numbers. That was one of the things we asked about, and that was built in, but you didn't see the full detail.
It's dwarfed by the 500,000 though, right? It's like 3% of the benefit you're getting every year.
Okay. So if folks are ready, I'll request a motion effective January 21st, 2025 to set the public hearing date for the proposed property purchase located at 2 Farms Village Road for February 18, 2025 at 5:45 at Town Hall Main Meeting Room, 933 Hot Meadow Street, subject to the conditions discussed this board and council approval of those changes referencing the total amount in the phased purchase.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay,
Aye.
that motion carries unanimously. First phase will be, the hearing is for the first 1 million.
Thank you,
Okay.
Chair. Can I just say thank you very much for moving this forward. We greatly appreciate the discussion. And as I think you were who said, I've been on this board for probably more years than I care to admit, and this is easily the project that the three boards have coordinated the best, and I greatly appreciate that. I think the students of this town are going to appreciate that. I hope you saw and could feel the passion for this program, and again, we've got experience with the Transition Academy, so very confident that we'll be able to deliver on this one as well. If I could just say, all right, I think you asked the right question about sort of the worst case scenario. I get that, but I fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not really which way the need is there, right? You look at a place like Glastonbury, who's got a waiting list of 50, I think it is. You look at the surrounding towns; they're not going to build this kind of program. And then I think, as you heard the other night, just from the newspaper article alone, we got inquiries from 2 towns about sending a tuition-based student almost immediately, essentially, right? So
When are you opening?
It is. I feel very confident that the need is going to be there, but I greatly appreciate the question. Again, I don't want to take up any more of your time, and just thank you for moving the ball forward on this.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Nice job.
Going macro, and I totally agree with what he said. We talked about all the digging and all the specifications and all the, we have to do this. We got to go to the public. We got to have our act together. We got to know what each thing stands for. It's a lot of work. I just want to take us back up to the pay to save principle, which was disparaged in public comments, and which I want to support. It is a foundational principle of this board. It's one of the things that we are supposed to look for opportunities to do, and that's exactly what this is. And it's roughly 5 years. And I mean, whenever we can get our money back in 5 years for this kind of a thing that has the educational benefits that the chair of education just pointed out, I think we're really doing our job. I just want to pay to save is a good term. It's a good function. It's something that we are supposed to do. I think we're reaffirming that tonight.
Absolutely, as the numbers, I greatly appreciate those comments. As the numbers bear it out, let's be very clear. If this program does not move forward, Simsbury taxes will increase at a higher rate. I can't say it any more plain than that.
All right. Well, thank you both, and we
Thanks, everyone.
appreciate
Thank you.
everyone's work and the presentation, so it's much appreciated. You guys are welcome to stay.
Thank you.
Okay, we had adjusted the agenda, and we will now go on to the finance director's report. For those watching at home, it's on page 97 of the packet. Amy, why don't you walk us through that?
Sure. Find it. Okay. So just the standard items on here, no new supplemental appropriations, no grants in a bit. The pooled investments are there. You can see our rates of return anywhere from 4.15% on our money market to 5% on one of our CDs. The only thing I wanted to add to this is I was going to talk about the Henry James audit closeout, but since I don't really have anything certain, I kind of have a soft update on it. I didn't put it in writing. Our Henry James auditor for the state of Connecticut did come out last week and completed the audit for the school construction project, which is great news because we're moving in the right direction considering it's been years since it's even been thought of being audited. And they're starting to get some of those older projects closed out. So the audit went well. They owe us a final report and our final payment. And we asked for a timeline on when we can expect a final closeout. And he said 2 weeks to months. So 2 weeks to months.
2 weeks, 2 months?
2 weeks, 2 months.
Between 2 weeks and several months.
Oh, I got it. All right.
So let me make sure because we've been talking about this for, I don't know, a year, 2 years.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. So we completed the work at Henry James. We brought it in under budget by $2 million. And we can't release that money, which was allocated or appropriated however many years ago, until the completion of the audit, which is now complete. So where is that money now?
It's in our bank account.
It's in our bank account.
It's earning interest.
And so it's more than $2 million now.
Well, yeah.
And-
The general fund has benefited from it, though. We don't allocate it to the project.
And we're waiting just for the auditors of public accounts, with whom I have dealings in my capacity as a state employee.
Oh, good. I'll give you his name.
Well, they're in the same building, yeah. We're waiting for them to issue a final report.
Yeah, we need the final report. Which
So
then
they've just
releases-
let us know informally that
Yeah.
they're thinking about doing that.
Right, so we need the final report to get the final payment to close out the project.
And once we get that report, assuming it's within our lifetimes, we'll be free to use that money. We don't want to use it in a way that creates a cliff, but we can use it how, Madam Chair?
So there is an unfunded school roof that needs to be replaced that costs about $2 million. To me, that seems like the perfect one option to consider. $2 million savings on a school project, $2 million roof need, no funding source for it. That seems like a logical way to do that. Otherwise, we're going to have to go out to bond for
Right,
that.
and that project, when are we planning, when do we expect that project to
In the next
start?
year or two, it was moved out, I believed, as part of trying to save money in this year's budget. So
We're
there's
2
a need.
months apart, Mark.
So the good news is we're gonna get this money after, when did we complete the project?
Oh my gosh, a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
For
I think
7
right
or
before I
8.
got here.
Yeah,
So
7 or 8 years ago.
2018.
yeah, that's right, because
Yeah.
they have something like a 7-year backlog
Yes,
in the
yes.
auditors public account. But the bad news is it's not going to affect the mill rate in the budget we're
Correct.
passing this year.
It's not. But it will save.
Well, if we can get it in 2 weeks, it could.
So it might,
It might.
it might.
Have some
And
faith.
there's, well, I was going to use a crude expression, but there's not much we can do about it.
No. Although I have reached out to Jeff, who is government affairs. He works in government affairs for a private company, and asked him to reach out to our state delegation and to see if they can push that along a little bit. So I think the chair of the board of ed will be reaching out to our local representatives to try and move that, and I'm sure they'll be reaching out to Wendy to help advocate for that as well. One question we have on supplemental appropriations, just as a reminder, Mark reminded me, thank you very much. In October, this board assigned dollars for the police settlement of $225,000 in the general fund, under the anticipation that that was going to settle and we would need a supplemental appropriation. As you see in your packets, actually the Board of Selectmen is doing much better than anticipated, looking at about $800,000 in savings at year end. Do we still need that? Or can we just absorb that through the current year savings that have been generated? So that's a topic of discussion. I'd ask you to weigh in.
So, when's the next Board of Selectmen meeting, the 27th?
27.
Okay, so the 27th, we will actually have all of the finalized union negotiations and wage payouts that we've done from any settlements, and we'll actually be requesting the transfers within the budget, which will include the police.
So not a supplemental appropriation, will be with these current year
I think we'll have
appropriations.
current year.
Okay, that's good. That's great news too. So congratulations, Mark, on that.
Subject to the Board of Selectmen's action on the 27th.
Well, they've approved the contract, so I think there will likely be a request. For members of the public, we can do transfers between appropriations starting January. Can't do those prior to January, so this is an appropriate time to do those transfers. right. And then, are there any other questions on the finance director's report? Okay. Then we will move on to town fiscal year 2024-25 budget status report as of December 31st, 2024. Amy, before you begin, let's start with the big picture. What does year end look like? Where revenues and savings, what are we looking at? And then go into the details.
Sure. So overall, on the revenue side, about $2.2 million under budget, and on the town side, about $90,000, not including if the Board of Ed can supplement their loss. So that's a worst case scenario. So overall, right now, we're looking at about a $2.3 million surplus overall.
Amy, separating out the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed, because they're two legally separate budgets.
Mm-hmm.
The Board of Selectmen is looking at savings of how much in their operating budget?
So it is the 6 plus 80, so around 700,000 to 800,000.
So one of the things, because they are a legally separate budget, those savings do not need to be made up by the Board of Selectmen unless we so choose. And one of the things that can be used there, which will impact how we fund the the purchase price, is the non-lapsing fund. So they are looking at a $400,000 loss. They can tap the non-lapsing fund to cover that is one option. And internal savings. So I anticipate that will be part of our budget as when we get to the budget discussion. I think Matt is planning on that, but that means that money won't be available to purchase the property. From our perspective, take one from one, it's all the same money. It doesn't really matter from us. Okay, Amy, why don't you walk us through what you got?
So some highlights on the revenue side. If you go about halfway down the page, you'll see the tax department. We're looking at excess revenues of about 1.3 million. So as you know, and I say pretty much every quarterly, that's the difference between the 99.5% actual collection rate compared to what we budget at 98.5%. The estimated savings there is about 770,000. And then in addition to that, when we were in the midst of COVID and motor vehicle values had skyrocketed, coming out from that as the motor vehicle values started to decline, we had planned in the prior budget year to decrease our supplemental motor vehicle values from about 1.1 million down to about 600,000. Based on the actual supplemental motor vehicle list, we're at about 1.2 million. So some good news there. Motor vehicles are not coming down as fast as anticipated. So that is the majority of your $1.3 million surplus on the tax line.
Amy, what does that mean for next year's budget? So that number is going to go up 600,000?
So our supplemental that we have right now is at 600,000, and it will go up to $1 million. So it'll go up to 400,000. We could do about 1.2 if we wanted to, but anticipating those values will continue to come down. It'll give us about 35 million to work with on a supplemental, and 1.2 is about 38 million. So even if it started to come down, Francine's comfortable with $1 million for supplemental.
Okay. Well, finally, some good news.
Yes. The finance department, again, we're looking good on our interest investment income. So our interest rates were budgeted at 4.25%. Actuals are closer to 4.5% with the CDs and the increased money market that we were able to achieve this year. Those CDs will expire in February, I believe. So the majority of our money will be in that, 4.25, 4.5%. But since we were able to lock in, we were able to realize some savings there. That's all I had for highlights on the revenue side, unless anybody has any other questions.
Questions on the revenue side?
Not here.
Moving on to the expenditure side, I will just start with the Board of Education, since that is the biggest number there that you'll see as a deficit. As Lisa mentioned earlier, we had state funding that was reduced. Our excess cost reimbursement was around 69% last year, and this year they're only anticipating we're going to get about 59% state reimbursement. So that is a hit to our budget of about $410,000. The remaining is what we had talked about the last quarterly, our increased electricity costs of about $238,000, and that leads us to our loss on the Board of Education side of about $669,000. Matthew and I have been chatting since this came out. There are some moves being made on a personnel level that we're seeing if we can capture some savings that will offset this deficit. And then, as Lisa mentioned, we have the non-lapsing if we use it, but we're hoping to be able to reallocate and end with a zero. Moving on to the town items, a lot of more of the same with the salary savings due to either delayed hirings or vacant positions. So you'll see that in the town manager's office when we had our approved HR position, which is filled. We had a few months of salary savings there, and a partial year without an intern. On the general government, we have some anticipated savings in our education reimbursement. Last year, we had 2 individuals that applied for reimbursement. One of those individuals has completed their courses, so there will be some savings there. And then I don't believe there will be a leadership retreat this year, so I captured that savings in that line item as well. Moving down to the finance department, we had some general wage increase payouts that were budgeted in the contingency line item. So right now we're projected to be in a deficit in the finance department overall. In addition, we had a deputy assessor retirement, and then we had to pay out some vacation time as part of that retirement. So that will be included as part of your transfers that come next month. That will be going to the Board of Selectmen on the 27th. The planning department, again, had some staffing vacancies. All of their positions are now filled as of last week. Police department, I believe there's still 2 positions open there. Highway department, we're hoping this stands. Right now we had some anticipated overtime savings due to the light winter, so knock on wood that continues, and we'll be able to realize that savings as well. And then some more smaller $9,000 related to electricity. Library, again, we have small staffing vacancy. That final position's being recruited this week. And then, I didn't finish my comment. So the Parks and Open Space one, the $55,000, this was a budget error. As you may recall, we added new position, not for the fiscal year 25 budget, but I believe it was the fiscal year 24 budget. And there was 3 positions that were up to be approved. Board of Finance put it in contingency and allowed the Board of Selectmen to pick the position. It was the parks maintainer. So there was an error when we put it in the Excel spreadsheet and we put it at the bottom, and then the formula did not carry down. So we do have enough to cover that within our transfers, but that is what happened with that line item. So essentially it was just an Excel error where it didn't capture the extra person. And then some employee benefits related to health insurance and Social Security due to the staffing vacancies. Any questions on expenditures, projections?
One question, we're looking at a year-end positive surplus. Do we have yet an idea of how much we think we'll be able to contribute to capital reserves at year-end?
No, I haven't done those estimates, but if we're at about 18%, if the board wanted to stay at 16%, I'd probably just take the difference at whatever that is and transfer it to capital reserves, but I haven't put any thought into it, no.
But the fund balance at 18% was as of July 2024, so that may be slightly different now, right?
No, so the fund balance there on that top line is 6/30/24, 7/1/24, and then the estimated fund balance there is as of 6/30/25. So that's where I think that we're going to land.
Oh, okay. All right, so that's about a little over $3 million that potentially we could contribute back to capital reserves. Is that?
I believe you. I don't have the math off the top of my head.
Okay. When we get to budget, the reason why I'm asking is Mark is always thinking, well, can I tap that earlier?
It's 3, I agree with you, Jim. That was very good math on your part.
So, but that's one thing that will come up probably in our budget deliberations, whether to save that for the ensuing year's capital reserves, because that's how we fund capital, or whether to tap that early if there's a need. So it's probably too early to decide what to do with that, but that's another one of those tools that we have. Okay, you want to keep going, Amy?
Sure. The Simsbury Farms Fund, honestly, not really much to talk about here. Everything seems to be proceeding in accordance with the revenue and expenditures. Probably the closest I've probably ever seen the projections at this point in the year. So we had budgeted for about a $30,000 loss. And looking at the skating revenue, I don't think it's going to hit. But other than that, we're right in that realm of about a $40,000 loss. So pretty much right within projections.
Amy, going forward, is there a way to the reason why we budgeted for loss is we're doing a capital expenditure, we're using reserves.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way to show that? It's like,
Sure.
okay, that would be great. So it doesn't look like a loss, it was actually a budgeted expenditure from reserves. And that's same in the sewer, I think we did the same, okay.
Okay. Moving on to the health insurance fund. So that first line item for the premiums. This line item, I have the projections at the budgeted. This one I want to take a look at. Lockton had given us our projections that has what group each employee is in, what the premium is, what the increase is, and the combination of the employee contributions, the employer contributions should equal our premiums at the end of the year. Based on what's been going into the fund, I'm not seeing that, so I just want to take a look at that and I'll report back on an update on where we're going to land with the premiums. The other miscellaneous line, we have a para-subsidy funding from the state of Connecticut. So this is something that was new. The state of Connecticut gave us money to then in turn give to our paras as an HSA contribution. So that money essentially came in and then went right back out to our paras. Claims seem to be going as anticipated. And then we were seeing a huge stop loss surplus of about $171,000. This is bid every year by our consultants, and typically around like 20, 30, 35% increase. We were able to stay with our current vendor at a very reasonable rate, so some good savings there. At the bottom of the page, you'll see our fund balance at the beginning of the year was about $4.3 million, expecting a surplus of just shy of $200,000. And then we have our incurred but not reported claims that we have is sitting in our liability account of $989,000. So our total about 5.54 in reserves, which is 35% of claims. So as I say probably every quarter, the recommendation is 20 to 25% of expected claims for fund balance to be sitting in the fund. So we are very healthy right now.
Hey, what does that mean for budget projections? Our Lockton has recommended we use no more than 1/3 of anything over the 25%. And then we still have the $850 assigned. Do you have estimates of sort of what that can be such a big number? Have you yet had an opportunity to think about how that might impact the 2026 budget?
So the $850, we could probably unassign that. As far as the health insurance and utilizing some of those reserves, I'd probably wait until the next quarter to determine that claims stay good. And then if we are still above that 20-25% threshold, I mean, we could look at using some for the budget.
In the budget right now, we're looking at a 5.9 increase in health reserves.
4.9.
4.9, and what does that translate into dollars between town and education?
On the board side, it's about 500,000. So on the town side, it's probably a couple $100,000.
So $700,000 increase just on that. Using the reserves, how much could you get that down?
I don't know. I'd have to calculate it.
Range?
300,000 maybe, off the top
see if we're able to unassign it. An obvious thing to do would be put it in capital reserves to pay for the purchase of the property. Would be another tool we would have there. Or other options, you know, you can give us those other options as well. Okay.
I don't have anything there. I didn't really have anything of note on any of the other funds unless there's questions.
I don't have any more. Anyone else? Okay. I do have some capital questions, but we'll let you go on to that.
Sure. Actually, let's just start with your questions, because other than the reimbursement for that 250,000 from Bloomfield, everything.
Sorry, could you
I
speak
couldn't
up
hear
a
that
little bit?
one. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Everything is in the positive for the capital projects, with the exception of that multi-use trail, and we're expecting reimbursement from Bloomfield on that project. So, if you want to ask your questions, happy to answer them.
Sure. We have the finance accounting system from 2020 is listed as ongoing. I thought that was a contained appropriation. Is that a every year appropriation?
No, so that is our appropriation that we've been spending down for the munis. So when we implemented our financials, we implemented our payroll, and now the rest of that money is going to be used to implement the HR side of the house.
So that once it's done, it's not going to be
Right.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Public Works. One thing to note is there are a lot of projects that were approved that have a lot of unspent dollars. So begs the question of capacity, and should we be borrowing now until we clean up what we have? I'll leave that to you to sort of evaluate. I did notice that the elevators were broken at the library, but we just replaced them, so I'm assuming they're under warranty. But if not, elevator renovations is showing a balance of $16,000, so that's something that could be used for that possibly. Do we have a status on whether that's under warranty, Mark?
I will get back to you, Chair. I don't know. I assume so, as you do, but let me confirm.
Okay. And Latimer Lane, we're showing there was some project savings as well. Was that money that just didn't go out to bond, or is that also sitting waiting for an audit?
We're not done paying bills on that project yet. It did not close out. It formally ended in, I believe, December, and so there's still bills to pay, so that's not a final savings.
So we don't know if there will be actual savings there. Okay. Any other questions on CIP projects? Okay. Moving on to CNR, similar. Parks and Rec has a lot of approvals that have not been used. One thing I think we should think about is when those projects should lapse, why are we approving purchase of equipment that isn't being done in the year it was approved? Maybe that's more on your side, Mark.
We're looking at it.
Whether we could evaluate that, because that's money that could have been spent elsewhere if it wasn't needed in the year it was approved. It's not like a capital project that has a life. There's one project that looks like it has lapsed, and that's the town farm facility and junk removal. It was approved in 2022, July 1, 2021. So I just asked Mark and Amy to close that out or bring it to us for supplemental if you still need it when we get to February. And the perpetual life safety analysis that came to us before you. That was so urgent and has not been spent.
I'll check on that, Chair. I think I heard it was done. I don't want to get everybody's hopes up.
But there's 14,000 still there, right? Okay. And then IT switches, we had approved 34,000 in 2022, and yet there was no spending, and now we needed an additional 38,000, and still.
I can check on that. I know they did them, so it's probably miscoded somewhere.
Oh, so it's just waiting to.
I'll probably just have to find it and put it to
Okay.
its right code. But yeah, I know that those were done.
Okay. And one of the, I don't know if we need this, because Mark, if you clean that up, but if we're going to continue to show equipment and vehicle purchases that aren't spent, can we add a column on expected completion dates for purchase?
Fair enough.
Okay. All right.
How is this sorted by department? Is that
And I forgot to mention that Amy did something two things great.
She did a lot of things great. We're just going to mention two of them.
I'm only going to mention two. I'll mention many of them, but two things that she did I thought were really, really helpful is one, she divided the capital projects by department. So you can really see the progression and who's doing what and where the gaps are. And that was super helpful. And then the other thing she did in the operating budget is she added a column year-end projections earlier than we normally do. And that's really helpful for us to budget planning. So two huge improvements to the report. So thank you for that. I know it's for people watching that may not sound that exciting, but it's really cool. So thank you. All right.
I was going to ask if you could sort it into 20, so I won't.
Amy, Board of Ed.
So page 161, just two things I wanted to mention on the revenues. So our open choice attendance and early learning grant, you can see that there's a decreased funding of about $116,000 from last year compared to this year. So we have 10 less students that are a part of this program at 10,000 student. So therefore our decreased funding. And then
Amy, before you move on from that, so what do? They're down 116,000. Do they just hire one less teacher? I mean, how is that absorbed?
I can find out the specifics, but we have a lot of, like some of our magnet schools are paid for with this grant. Some of it is their equipment. So if we need to reduce somewhere, we have some flexibility where we can take from any of those line items. If the staffing does reduce, then there's our reduction right there. It also pays for some of our Hartford billing as well. So I can find out the mechanics of the individual details, but we typically just pull from things that were already approved to reduce it. And then the excess cost, which you had, we've already talked about a couple times tonight, expecting a $410,000 decrease because of the reduction in the state funding.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
The excess cost funding is $410,000 less than last year because of the reduced state funding from 69% to 59%.
There is some information at the state. They did find that they were not properly accounting for the interest on the ARPA dollars, and it is now being returned to the general fund. So there is some rumblings out there that they're going to try and perhaps use some of that money to pay back some of the municipalities, whether that happens or not.
Fingers crossed.
Right, we'll be watching that.
And then on the expenditures, timing compared to last year is the majority of the reasons for the rate of spending and why one year is higher than the other. I did want to point out the operation of plant, though. Just in accordance with the breakdown I just gave on the deficit, our electricity costs are coming in higher than anticipated. This is something that's been all over the news, and we are just feeling it like everybody else.
Amy, why aren't we seeing as big a difference on the town side?
More room in their budget. It depends on how the department has budgeted. So some take the budget times the increase that Tom Roy would provide, so they might already have some savings in there that translate over. On the board side, I take what I think that we're gonna land in the current fiscal year, and then do that by the projected budget. So it just depends on how they came up with their numbers.
Well, that might be something to think about, whether we can sort of standardize how we do that.
It's Chair, it's something we're looking at, going back to zero-based budgeting, which I think, I can't remember who on your board was in favor of that, but we're looking at rolling that out by department, because we don't have the resources to do it organizational-wide on the municipal side, and say we're going to do ZBB on every department. But we were looking at it, as we got into the budget cycle this year, and obviously HR is new. Our police chief essentially uses ZBB every year anyway, so we've checked the box there. And I think there's a couple of others that we'll outline in our budget message, which we submit to the board, as you know, on the Board of Selectmen on the 10th. And then next year, looking ahead to getting to DPW and parks and some of the others, and look at
EPPW?
DPW, the Public Works, and do that budget cycle, wipe it clean and do that zero-based budgeting. So we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, I mean, even if you can't do zero-based, just to look at your programmatic areas is.
We think it's good to do every now and then, not every year. But
Okay, well, thank you for that. We appreciate that. I know that's certainly been talked about. Amy, do you have anything more on that before we get to budget discussion? Okay. As we move on to budget, just one issue that came up, budget calendar. Can we just everyone take a look at that? There was some question about whether the Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed would be presenting their budgets on the same night. We will not be doing that because that would be a 6 to 8 hour meeting, which I cannot do. So we'll keep it as we had approved, which is the Board of Ed presenting on March 4th and the Board of Selectmen on the 11th. And then one of the things that's not on the budget calendar is we have a budget continuation on March, I think 20th. Of course, now I can't find my sheet because I gave it to everyone. Oh, thank you. To March 20th. So that's if after the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed present to us after we have the governor's budget, if we need to send it back, it will give them the opportunity and they can come back to us on the 20th for that. Public hearing will be on April 8th, April 9th if there's a snow day. We'll continue the public hearing on April 22nd. The reason we're not going the following week is it's school break and a lot of our residents will be out of town. And then we always put in an extra date on the 23rd in case the motions are complicated. It gives Amy and Melissa an opportunity to clean those up without having to bring the printer to the library, which they do periodically. So we have that, and I just ask Amy to please put all budget dates on the budget website, including Board of Ed, in case the public has an interest in attending any of those. And for members of the public, there are a couple of big budget meetings coming up. On the 27th, the Board of Selectmen will be reviewing capital improvement plans and CNR plans. And on the 28th, the superintendent is presenting his budget. And then in February, the town manager presents his budget. And so we'll start the whole series. But if you could just make sure those dates are accurate, Amy, and get them all up, that would be great. Okay. All right, we'll now move on to budget discussion. I asked Amy to please pull up the budget model that we've been using.
The one you sent me earlier.
Yeah, that's the most accurate. Don't anyone panic. I was playing with numbers. The numbers aren't. Although you should panic a little bit.
be all right.
Just as a reminder for the public, the Board of Finance goal has been and remains a tax increase at or below 2.5%, which is the Social Security cost of living adjustment. The governor's budget will be coming out, we think, February 5th. We are assuming that we will get better numbers than we are currently projecting because of what's been said, but we don't know that. And we are hopeful that some of the town revenues will come in a little bit more favorably than we had initially projected. So what we did here is I added a line called unfunded state mandate because we just heard from that we are short $400,000 by the state. They chose not to reimburse us what we are owed. In the past, when that has happened, when there's been something extraordinary that's not within the control of any of the budgets, the Board of Finance has offered to hold harmless that amount. Examples of that was when the Malloy said he's going to charge municipalities $4 million to pay for teacher pensions. We were not going to make the Board of Selectmen absorb that in the budget. We treat that as a hold harmless. We think that $400,000 will eventually be paid for in the governor's budget. We are hearing information that the legislature is focused like a laser on that and trying to make us whole, so that may not have to be absorbed. So we're treating that a little bit separately for conceptual conversations.
How's the timing of that work?
Well, we'll find out. We'll get the governor's budget February 5th. The legislature will do their budget later. The legislature never decreases the amount to municipalities. They might increase it, but in the past, and all municipalities across the state use the governor's budget as the basis for budgeting because the legislature won't get their act together and do it on time. So we are stuck with the governor's budget.
400. What year is that associated with?
That's this year, but if you assume it's going to continue next year, it has to be baked into the budget. It's a permanent loss. They're reducing less than they
This
were.
isn't to cover this year's, it's to.
Yeah, this is in anticipation that it'll
Okay.
need to be absorbed next year. And perhaps that'll go away, which is why it's highlighted as a separate item. That might go away. Maybe they'll fix that problem. But if they don't, we'll have to sell it to the public and explain, look, your taxes would have gone up this amount, except that the state charged you extra.
And this year's 400 was, Amy had that in her previous.
Yes.
Got it.
That's exactly right. And so the question is, what I did is I changed the model just to make it a little easier to see, and I put in two numbers. I think I did for the Board of Selectmen, I did 2. I just picked that randomly, and 2.9 for the Board of Education. 2.9 is the current rate of inflation. Amy, can you change the Board of Selectmen to 2.5?
Chair, really quick, we just lost Mike on the landline, so he called me on my. Mike, can you hear any of this? Or should I put you closer to Lisa?
I am hearing you. I actually hear you better now than on the other phone. So this is a massive improvement.
All right, we'll put that in the budget. We'll get an iPhone for.
Thank you.
All right.
We have that in the budget, Mike.
So if we were to say, for example, Board of Selectmen coming at 2.5, Board of Education coming at 2.9, we're still looking at a 4.15 tax increase, which is nowhere near the 2.5%. So we say, okay, but we're going to get better revenues from the state. Amy, can you go below and start playing with revenues? Like 400,000. Let's make that 400,000 go away. Now we're down to 375. Starting to get closer. Now we still need to find, to get it to 3, what do we need to reduce by, Amy?
700.
7?
700,000 share.
Okay, well do 300,000 because we just found that from health.
So we found it where?
From the health
Oh.
savings. But that still leaves us with difficult budgets for the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed. For the Board of Selectmen, 722 feels like, do you even need that much? Last year you came in with $2 million in savings. This year you're looking at 800,000 in savings. Why did we need to go up? And that's one question, we'll be grappling with. Mark, do you want to speak to that at all?
Not yet, Chair. I mean, we're aware of it, and we're looking closely at all the budget lines that are not that are tracking to favorable. Some of which we went over tonight. We still have some work to do to make our number on February 10th. And actually, I should say that our budget will be released even a few days earlier because it is going to be available in the Board of Selectmen packet, which will be issued on that Thursday preceding the 10th. For the benefit of board members and the public. So but we still have a little work to do, but we see the same numbers that you're showing here.
And one of the things, our board had said at the tri-board, we need to find $3 million. We found 400,000 with Francine and the cars. We might lose 400,000 with special education, but if we hold that harmless, it's a net savings of 400. We still need to find $2,500,000 to get us where we want. Amy, can you change the Board of Selectmen to a 2? Is that right?
2 and 2. I mean, take 2 off.
Take it 2%. That dropped it quite a bit. Is that accurate?
It's the formula.
I'm wondering if our formula's off a little bit.
Yeah, it's a little bit off. I mean, it looks right. K8 you're picking up here times the 1.02. What was previously there? 2.5.
Alright, I'm gonna have you do that on your other model just to make sure that that's right in case there's something funky with this. But so suddenly we start to get to 3.9. Has the Board of Selectmen ever come in at a 600,000 increase? Yeah, they've come in at 400,000 increase. decrease. Can it be done? Is that within the realm of possibilities? Possibly. Can the Board of Ed come in at 2.8? Well, fixed costs are now at 3.5, Amy?
Sorry. You missed that, sorry.
Board of Education, fixed costs are now at 3.5, right? So that would be a decrease of $1 million. Can they do that? Possibly with the use of some health. Now we took health already out, so you'd have to add 300 back in. Can you add 300 back in on the revenue, or decrease the revenue by 300? We get to 3.6. So depending on what happens with the revenue, we're starting to get closer to the 2.5. Are we going to get to the 2.5? I don't know. Can we get to the 2.9, which is the current rate of inflation? We probably can. So I want to get folks' thoughts on whether we want to give additional guidance. I think the board, I've talked with Jeff, I've talked with Matt, that our board was probably going to come in and say to them, we need you to find $1 million to $1.5 million. I think health did not come in as we were hoping, so it's going to be closer to $1 million in savings for the Board of Selectmen. Obviously, I've talked with Mark and Wendy, given past history of returns.
What was the original guidance? But health was outside of the original guidance.
The health is outside of the original guidance, but we said that they could use some of their savings from the health using the anything above the 25% of reserves. So that's one way they can get some of those numbers down. I want to open it up to you guys to what numbers do you want us to look at?
It's going to be in hour 4. I'm having a hard time going through the numbers, honestly.
Quit prescribing at 8:45 after all this. Prescribing and what we want the cuts to be?
Well, I mean, we don't have to. We've said we need to find $3 million. We could leave it at that. Our goal is still 2.5.
Look, I think the more we prescribe, the better the chances that we get where we want to go. Like, I think if we just leave it open or we don't allocate for the savings.
No, I was talking about the specifics, not the global number.
Oh, okay.
I'll open it
But I
up.
think, Chair, you were asking, like, do we want to give a reset number or a different target or whatever it is? And I think the more we give and share information, it just creates a more useful dialogue when we're actually talking through the numbers at the end.
But one thing, when we say Board of Education cut $1 million, what percent of their budget is that off of the previous year?
$1 million off of 80 and change.
Yeah, by 85. Let's see.
Less than 2%.
It's about 1.17%. Can they find 1.1? It's not off the total because we're giving them an increase. They're still getting the 3% increase. It's saying, find 1.1. Right?
Look, it's not easy, but I think it's reasonable for us to do this given our history of tax increases in the last couple of years, as well as where inflation is coming out and what the taxpayer is expecting. So those are reasonable.
So let's think about a $1 million request to the Board of Ed to get their increase down.
What does that leave us if our guidance now is $1 million?
So that leaves us right there. Whoa, 2.6 tax increase? Amy, something's going on with this model.
Okay, I'll take 2.6.
That doesn't make sense.
3.6.
So 3.6, yep.
So 2% for both the town and for the school, it was 2.6 tax increase. 2.8.
I don't think the school can do that. keep the school at a 2.9%, Amy? And then we keep the Board of Selectmen, that's a 3.6.
That's, are we taking back the 400,000?
If you eliminate the 400,000 there, what does that get us to? That gets us down to a 3.9 if we do the hold harmless.
And the town's at 2, Chair?
Gets us down to the 3.9% tax increase. We say, okay, that 400,000 we're gonna have to tax for, we're gonna tell the public, it would be a 3.9% tax increase.
Isn't that 3.19?
3.19, yeah, what did I say?
You said 3.9.
Oh, 3.19. It would be that, but for the state,
Just put the 400 in back in.
put the 400 back in.
You'd be a little too.
Unfortunately, we're at 3.6, not 3.19 because of the state.
Right.
This is a blame the state budget.
Nevertheless,
Did we take
It's still
out,
a,
what did we put? Did we put additional revenue in there? Is that
Amy, how much additional revenue is that?
I think we added 400.
350.
Can you do a dollar change? Yeah, do that.
We had 350 or 400.
So we added 650. That might not happen.
right?
So take that out. And that's a 425. So that, the question is, how do you give the guidance? It's gonna be dependent on, are we gonna find new revenue? Is there a chance we're gonna find new revenue? I think there is.
We found 67,000 today, but it'll require Board of Selectmen action on some fees. We're working every day, and I didn't do this last year, Chair, as you know, on the revenue side. We were focused solely on expenses. So this year, we're looking at some of those other fee raises that are going to require BOS action. I met with Wendy today, and just after that meeting, we found that it had 67,000. So I haven't even updated my chair on that yet, but we're working on it daily. So I think there's some revenue room even outside the normal things that this board would do, say vis-a-vis interest rates and investment return and stuff. We're looking at the line items, some of which, as I said, this one in the building department would need legislative action raising a fee, but we've looked at all the peer towns, and I just sent an email today to draw up the legislation to do that. So that's an example of something.
All right, thank you for doing that. We appreciate that. So
We're not leaving any stone unturned, although the memorial pool is safe.
you're you're finding the
It
memorial.
was a long debate, but that was, you're losing a lot of money every season with, the repairs but those are the things, again, leaving no stone unturned, that we're right up to the deadline of
So one thing I would say, if you don't close Memorial Pool this year,
next year is, I made that point.
start planning for that.
We
next
are, and I
year.
think it's about that. You're exactly right. I think that what made the decision to save it this year was certainly not the financial. It was the noticing and the letting the public know with enough notice to make alternative arrangements. And I wouldn't say anything about it except I wanted to let this board know that it's an example of some of the things we're doing to try to close this gap.
How much do we lose on Memorial Pool every year, roughly?
Our numbers were we would save just under 100,000 if we did not open it.
Amy, what
It
is
generates a lot of revenue too on the revenue side.
Where's the splash pad supposed to go?
Right there. The idea was you would have nothing there for a year or two as you
So-
delayed the splash pad.
We would still investigate the splash pad. Those are two
Our
separate
hope
things.
was to, in fact, I think to your point, if I may, Chair, the answer to that question is the likelihood of the splash pad happening, I thought, was actually enhanced by not opening Memorial Pool this year, so that there'd be a transition year where there was nothing there, and at the very least, you could make the case that there was some savings there. But I think that the shift in our thinking was you need that splash pad to be more grant funded than was originally. You're going to have to find the grants to make that happen. But the public impact of not opening the pool was thought to be too severe.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Amy, fixed costs for the Board of Selectmen was at 337? Was that right? So 1.17% of Board of Selectmen, if we ask them to cut that, would be about $360. I think we should ask you to cut a little more because of the savings history you've had. We say cut 400,000. I mean, I don't know, can you come in below 2%?
No. I don't think so, Chair. I mean, we're doing everything we can, even absent guidance, but 300 would be a much better number than 4. I mean, we've been working towards 3 anyway, as you know, best case scenario. So telling us to cut 4 is, as I sit here tonight, I don't know where I find it. I've got something in the hopper with collective bargaining that is, you know, at the 11th hour. It might get me there, it might not, but I don't have an agreement with the union yet.
Yeah, but you saved $2 million the year before, and you're looking at 800,000 savings this year.
How much of that is that just on the expense side, or is
Just
that?
on the expense side.
Well, we're looking at it.
All right, where are people's comfort level? Do we want to give $1 million to the Board of Ed, try and find that? 400.
Sorry, 1 million from what? From off of the two,
Have them come in at 2.9.
and that's a million. What's the million?
Their fixed costs are at 3.5. So to go from
3.5
percent to
Well, that's
2.9.
just the fixed costs. But this is off the total. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Right now, there's a projected expenditure that would of 88.29, and that represents a 2.9%
Right.
increase. Does that reflect that $1 million you want to cut? And that
Yes.
still leaves us with a 4.2% tax increase.
Oh, she took it.
How do you get a 4.2% tax increase when everything else, like all the increases, are so low?
Grand list.
Grand list.
And
Is the grand list dropping?
yes,
1 point.
by 800,000. Now we got better news. Dropping by 800,000. Remember, motor vehicles
So the
capped.
800,000, and then you got the 400,000 here, which is sort of like held harmless the way you're doing it. So those two things add another point on. So okay, I guess it makes sense.
And don't forget, motor vehicle mill rate is capped at 32.46. Okay. Amy, can you just close that down and take your model and make sure those numbers are right, that the model isn't wacky? Do 3.9 and 2%.
It's just
I
weird
mean,
if the
2.9 and 2%.
2.5.
Yeah, two. No, 2.
when the grand list is shrinking, and yet we're going to ask for a tax increase greater than inflation, it just feels really.
Well, so the other thing I asked Amy to do, which she has not been able to get us yet, but with the new state law and the depreciation schedule, there will be savings in the car tax. And what we need to do is look at the total taxes. Initially, Francine estimated it would be 5% savings off the car tax, which is only $9, right? Not a lot. OPM took an
$9 what per person? I don't know.
per car. So $18. But OPM did an analysis which said if you have a 2020 car, Honda Civic, that's worth this amount, you might be saving $100. So the question is, how do we capture the new savings in the motor vehicle? Because if it's $100 off your car, yes, you have a 3.6 or a 3% tax increase, but you're getting $100 off on your car. What's the total taxes you're paying?
Right, but there's no correlation between who's saving the money
That's
on the
correct.
car taxes and who's spending more as a result of property taxes. So we talked about this afternoon.
It's hard.
It's happy news that people might save money on their car taxes, but that would not incline me to accept a 4.2%
Right.
increase in property
I think
taxes.
4.2% is too high. I agree. I'm saying it's might be worth considering because I think state aid is going to come in a little bit higher. Whenever there's this kind of outcry, the state aid usually comes in 300,000 to 400,000 more than we expect. It passed as prologue. That said, the governor's got a tight budget, it might not happen.
Yeah, so that means we have to find the savings, which means you have to find the savings.
Well, that's the problem if you give guidance and then we come back and say, no, we need you to go back and even find more.
Yeah, so, well, I mean,
That's
the
why at this
point
stage,
is
I
with
think
the numbers we
should do
got here are too high.
That's why at this stage, I think we should have people find something, whether it's the full million or whatever you said to the Board of Ed. It should at least be a chunk of that.
Well, yeah, you say like,
$500,000.
No, $1 million.
Yeah.
and if
That's a
we get
million,
good news
and
back, have them, you know, we've done this before, I think, is, you know, you kind of prioritize what you gotta get rid of and just start,
Yeah, whittling your way through that.
yeah, you know, if we get good news on the revenue side.
Yeah, we can always, that's a good problem to have.
Right.
Well, if we get if we get better number in the revenue, there are two things we can do. To Bert's thing, we can lower the mill rate if we get better revenue.
Sure.
Or if there's a need that really needs to be met, it could be met with that revenue. That
Sure.
would be a secondary.
But it depends on what our starting point is with the guidance.
Yeah, so start with, I mean, if people are comfortable, we'll start with Board of Ed coming at 2.9, Board of Selectmen coming at 2.
But if we do that, we're talking about a tax increase that's greater than what we.
We are.
Is it in
So
the threes or is it
We don't
four?
want to be in the, it's 4.2.
That was the
Amy,
4.2?
can you double check that number?
And if we do that, then we
So
might
the
be
town
forced.
at 2 and the Board of Ed at 2.9, flat revenue, it's a 4% tax increase.
Down to 4% to So, I mean, your point, Lisa, Madam Chair, is that we could give that guidance, and if we have to come back and say find more savings because our hopes for additional revenues from the state don't materialize, somehow
That's a hard thing to do, to go back and say find
we
more.
might have to.
Does this incorporate Francine's number?
Oh, this one might not have. Oh no, it does. Yes, it does.
Is the million here? Is that the same million? Where's,
The what million?
go back to the levy calc,
Oh wait, it doesn't have it on the quick one.
right?
Yes, good catch. There we go.
So what do we got now?
36.
Are we sure about that? Because that's different than the other model.
I mean,
We saw that 3.6 somewhere.
This doesn't include the 400 hold harmless.
No.
Okay. So that might be slightly more. Are people comfortable with this concept of the hold harmless on the Board of Ed if we have to do it? Because that's something we can explain to the public. You would be at 3.6. You're going to be higher because the Board of Ed, the state, is
What was our increase last year?
4.65.
Just below 5,
I mean, I think we have to be as close to 3 as we can. As
Yeah.
close to the rate of inflation.
yeah. I agree.
We got two benchmark numbers out there, Social Security 2.5 and inflation what, 2.9?
Yeah.
So I think we have to crack 3.
You mean be in the threes or be below 3?
No. At or
Yeah. And then add the hold harmless on and be at like 3.5 or whatever we
Right.
put us.
Right.
But that's not, so we gotta.
I don't like it either, to be honest. I mean,
Oh,
I'd love to be at 2.9.
What do we need to get there though? I mean, this is at 3.6 without the whole harmless, right?
What would we need to get to 2.9, Amy? How much more revenue, ad revenue?
36. Let's just do.
We just got bad news tonight on revenue, guys.
Yep.
We're at 4.25 on interest. It's going down to 3.75.
Yeah, you pushed it to 3.6.
I didn't. I was somebody else pushed that. That was Amy.
Whose idea was it to ask if?
So we need about 750,000 in new revenue.
we
to
need
get
what?
750,000 to get to 285.
So honestly, that's kind of doable.
It is?
Yeah. So I think we're going to get 300 from the state. Mark's getting us 100,
maybe more than 100.
maybe
But
more.
the problem isn't really the expense side. It's that, well, I don't need to tell you this, but playing with revenues this close to a budget release date, you know, it's optimistic. You know, I don't.
We can't play with revenues.
No, but I mean that's what we're talking about. We're talking about your hope that we get 300 from.
Yeah.
I've got a better chance of cutting 100 than I feel that the state's suddenly going to come through based on legislative action. But you know that's up to this board. I wouldn't want to be sitting in the other side of the table here. But, I mean, we are doing everything that we can, but I do agree with Art that the more information you can give us, the better. If for no other reason than I never miss a target, and you can incent us to do it. But you know, and I've told you that before. So go ahead and give us the guidance. But as I look at the budget, I'm not quite clear, Chair, on how much reserves we're able to use.
It worked before.
For the operating budget?
Correct. And
Not much.
I know not much, but I think in fairness, some conversation about the use of reserves would be appropriate, if only to foreclose my hope that some amount of reserves could be used, as we've done in the past. You know, you talk about hold harmless from the 400, but what about hold harmless for the 800 on the motor vehicle decline? We got better news, but that's still very similar to, I think, what happened when, you know, big taxpayer moved out of town, and it was before I got here, but this board did make some, I think, pulling from reserves or whatever you did back in the day when Hartford left.
We did not pull from reserves.
What did you do that made it possible to balance that budget?
Well, what we did is we showed the public what the state had done and said, we're sorry, your taxes are going up. This is because of the state. Here's what we did.
But I think, with respect, that wasn't the third year of tax increases in a row. And that's the point. The framework for this discussion has been 4.5 and 4.5. Oh, what are we doing now? So it is different. But if you're willing to hold us harmless on the 400 because of that news, what about the 800 that would solve your problem and you're where you need to be? At some point, the use of reserves becomes, it can't be a taboo subject for discussion, even if it's a no. And I'd like to know if there was any wiggle room on
We
that.
will use some of the health reserves. That's 300,000 right there. That's one thing. I mean, my inclination is no, I wouldn't use reserves to create a cliff, but the hold harmless to explain it. But that's why we really need the analysis from Francine of what is the impact to taxpayers on the car.
If I could just spend another minute on it, because you said something that's very important, and that is you wouldn't use reserves to create a cliff. I'm not suggesting that you use reserves to set a cliff, to create a cliff at all. The assumption that if you use reserves for any aspect of your operating budget, you're creating a cliff is not correct. You're not creating a cliff if you know that you've got grand list growth in the subsequent year. By definition, it's not a cliff. In other words, a cliff is not just the line item and how do you fund the line item next year. The cliff is the very analysis that we do of what the grand list growth is expected to be next year.
Can you go to the grand list growth projections?
And the year after that.
But just to be realistic about this, because it's never one thing, like, what if we said it's a little bit of everything? Like, you know, we're not going to get to 2.9, we're going to get to 3.3. We're not going to hold you guys completely accountable to make the whole thing up with expenses, but there's going to be 100 or 200 grand from you guys or whatever, and then another few hundred from the Board of Ed, and then we, instead of saying we're going to do it with reserves or whatever right now, why don't we take that back and figure out through revenue or otherwise what our piece would be?
Yeah.
Because I think if we put it all in one group, this is never going to happen.
We've got to work our way down.
Yeah.
Wait.
So like little pieces, it seems to me, has been the most
The
successful.
reason why we're not going to do that is we're seeing a decrease in revenue 6.8. The next year we see increase, that gets us back to where we were. We're not even above where we started.
So why don't we just take that one on ourselves and say we'll sharpen our pencils on what we could do.
But the
All
cliff
forward.
disappears because you're back to where you were.
I see the point.
Because
There's
your
no
costs
growth.
have increased.
I
Yeah, no,
I just think we should avoid that one.
yeah.
That would be like last resort to me. I get your point.
Yes.
It's something we could do. I just think it's a last resort.
I think it's a,
If at the very last minute there was a magic number to hit and we could do it with using $500,000 and and we decided to do it, maybe I just wouldn't bank on it right now. I would exhaust every other thing we could.
I'm not sure you got my vote on that, but
Because you might never want to use it. Is that what you're saying?
well,
Much more of a break glass
I
in
would-
case of emergency situation.
yeah, and I would need to see
Fair enough.
better grand list growth.
I'm more on that
and,
side
yeah.
than like let's use it now.
Um,
But I think we can take part of this back to sharpen our pencils like we did last year and think of what we can do.
I think 2.9 is reasonable. I think they're expecting a 1 million,
2.9 before the hold harmless or 2.9 including the
including the hold harm. I mean, the hold harmless is separate,
Yep.
so 2.9 on their budget,
2.9%.
2.9%
I
increase.
feel like we're negotiating with ourselves here, so I don't know how far I should be willing to go, to be honest with you. So I'll say yes to the 2.9 because I think we're gonna end up higher than it, but
I think we might end up lower. Okay.
But I guess at 2.9, what does that mean for what we're asking of others?
We're asking the Board of Selectmen to come in at 2%.
2%.
But
2%.
where did this come? We didn't get to 2.9 now, right? They come in at 2, and what are we asking from the Board of Education?
2.9%.
Well, that doesn't give us a 2.9. That gives us what?
It does not.
3.6.
So we still have work to do.
We still have work to do.
I see.
So we're giving them that work to do, and then we've got work to do.
Right.
If you think that's equivalent, I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
There's
that's
no
all
magic
right.
split, but I'm fine with that.
I don't know that we can get there. I mean, you know, the problem with doing that, we might have to say to the boards, you need to come in lower.
Well, when you
We
give
should
the
let them know
guidance, it's part of the message is, we're working on it. It's, I mean,
As a starting point, we wanna see 2.9 and 2.
Yep.
Okay.
And we're
Okay.
gonna sharpen our pencils, and let's see if that can get us where we need to. There's always a risk that across all three, we have to come back again.
Right.
yes, every year seems like there's fewer levers to pull.
Yeah.
2.9 and 2 as a starting point. Amy, that gets us to 3.6.
Yes.
Including the 400.
What do you mean, including Francine's 400, you mean?
No.
No, I didn't do the whole harmless in mine. So it's
Including,
36.
what do you mean when you say including the 400?
I mean, including.
Does that assume we get another 400 from the state, or we do not get
Yeah,
the other?
right, exactly.
It's not holding, it's not putting the 400 aside as the hold harmless.
We're being hit with the 400.
It's coming through. It's
Right.
coming through as a bad guy.
It's a bad guy.
That's all I wanted to make sure.
So that,
Which is what we said wanted, right?
That's what we wanted.
2.9.
Yeah.
That's what we.
And then we
yes.
would say, oh, we're at 2.9, but with the state, we have got to fill that hole. They're
Right.
causing it to go up.
so that would, with the hold harmless, it would be higher than the 3.6, right, Amy? What would it be with the hold harmless?
Well, no, the hold harmless, so the 2.9 was with the hold harmless in your model.
So the 400 bad guy is in there.
Yeah, I don't have a breakout for the 400.
What does that mean, 400 bad guys? What does that mean?
It means we're assuming that
We're taking a hit for 400,000, and you're not supplementing
We're
that.
not getting the
You're not-
400,000.
Right.
Until later.
And we're gonna get to, did you say 2.9 on that? Because we're holding you guys to
no, I think
2,
we get to 3.6 on that.
we get to 3.6 on that one.
2.9 budget increase, 3.6 tax increase.
Say that again?
2.9 budget increase for the Board of Ed, and then 3.6 tax increase.
Yeah, but so including 400,000 more,
So
Let me see if I can.
On your model,
Please,
Chair, not to.
Please. 2% increase in the Board of Selectmen, 2.9% increase in the Board of Education. We lose the $400,000 in state aid, and we assume it's not coming back, and that produces an increase of 3.6%.
yes,
so you're showing the 400,000 reduction in,
I'm not showing the reduction, but in your model, you had showed the reduction and given them 2.9.
And that got us to 3.19, I think was the number that.
so show the 400,000 reduction in revenue. Where are we?
And then we're at 4.
We're at 4, we're back to 4. I mean, that's the real number.
4?
That's the actual number.
Is it, we had it as an expense last time. Is it the same?
Well, same thing.
Is it?
Still got it.
a good question.
I don't know. Amy, is that the same thing? You reduced revenue by 400, if we just added 400 in expense on the Board of Ed, 29 plus 400,
Why
we'll
would
get
that
there.
Yeah, it'd be the same thing.
Same thing.
I don't know. Because the one thing I've learned
It
about
feels,
Excel
it feels like a
is it's
trick
magic.
question. It should be the same, but it's
It
not.
should be the same, but it's often not.
Because there's more stuff going on in the
Right.
denominator with caps and stuff like that.
With the,
Yeah, it's the same.
with the statement that Bert made,
Okay, it's the
what do
same.
we come out at? 4?
Yeah, that's what it sounds
We
like.
have to have 4%, so it's not great.
Because it is an expense, it's not a revenue, right? Okay.
If the state makes us whole, we're at 3.6, and we still need to get down 0.5%, right? But that's where we can sharpen our pencils as well.
So then we own the last piece.
Well, but can we get there? I don't know that we can. So we all
Is
own
that
the
making
last
all the
piece.
pieces equivalently uncomfortable? Because that's what we're always trying to do, right? We
You're
want Mark
talking
as
about the-
uncomfortable as we are, as uncomfortable as Curtis is, as uncomfortable as the taxpayers.
I can tell you, I'm really
Louise.
uncomfortable
I
at
feel
36.
pretty uncomfortable. Yeah, no, I know. I know.
I think everyone's equally uncomfortable.
It feels like it. It feels like it's in that range of
It is.
equivalence, right?
Honestly, I think we could get marked down more.
But if they're uncomfortable for different reasons, right?
All right, so we start there? All right, Amy, we'll have to convey, Mark, we may come back to you and say, we couldn't, our sharpened pencil didn't do well enough, we need you to cut a little more, so please have in your pocket some contingency cuts. We come back to you.
So to go down to that number in Bert's list of 4, but be prepared to do something else?
Yes,
Okay.
be prepared for further reductions. We had told, yeah, I mean, when you think about it, when we say, Matt, cut 1% out of your budget, is that outrageous? I don't think it is. So that's within the realm of
Yeah.
reasonableness to ask. Okay, so we'll start there.
Yeah.
We're not where we want to be. We need to
But
find
we're
out.
gonna need this.
Right.
Yeah.
And now if we get really enthusiastic new revenues, grand list comes in a little better than Francine thought, state comes in with numbers,
Great problem to have.
and that, but those savings will then go to
We
mill
can
rate
decide.
reduction
We can
first.
decide.
All right,
Because if their cuts at their budgets are doable, maybe we give the taxpayers an actual.
exactly,
better number.
okay. So then we'll have that conversation once we see where the revenues are, all right,
I'd love to have that problem.
okay.
I'm a fan of this movie called Michael Clayton. Anyone seen that? That George Clooney is a lawyer who's lost a lot of money in a restaurant, and he meets a loan shark who's played by Bill Raymond, who's a terrific old actor and sometimes acts in Hartford. And Bill Raymond, the loan shark, says to him at a critical moment, "Get out the treasure map and start digging."
We're
That's
there.
what I think is our guidance.
Yeah, I think that's true. Find more than we've done. Hopefully you do better. One of the things I think I also want to request of you is please make sure you rank your capital reserves. It looks like you're using CNR projects because it looks like you're using most of CNR and we may not be able to fund all of it. So let's just make sure.
We did rank them.
Okay.
I mean, not in numerical order, but in 3 groups.
So we could cut if we need to.
You can see our prioritization. I mean, we didn't do it each item, but tenths of a point, but you see.
What I don't want to do is have a separate meeting and we decide we
Yeah.
need to cut.
Right.
I want to be able to say, okay, these are the ones that go.
Understood.
Okay, because your CNR did not include Board of Ed, so that is in further negotiations, I assume, right? No?
It did not, my list didn't include CNR for the Board of Ed.
Right, so that will need to be considered in your rankings. We have said in the past, and I just want to confirm, we were not going to increase to the traditional payback, so that's going to stay at 416. We're not going to, those are conversations, if we want to have that, we can do that over the summer when we have time to deliberate, but not in the middle of the budget. So anything you need for CNR, you should be using capital reserves, not an increase in the 416.
And we did.
Okay, looked like from the memo you done that.
No, what we did, Chair, was we ranked,
Okay.
and we have 3 lines on the list. One shows everything above the line funded by the traditional payback. The next line, the yellow line, shows what it would be if the board were accepting of doubling the traditional payback, which you're not. And then the third line, the green line, is we're asking for the same funding as was approved last year, whatever that number was, where you did use reserves to supplement.
Yeah, so that's the one point I'll just make for the public, that was an extraordinary use of reserves, that was not typical. So you shouldn't view that, oh, I get this every year, that was the most we've ever done in the history of the town. So, just so that, in terms of expectations, I assume we're still on board using of the 1.3 million in capital reserves to reduce debt service, the debt service plan we approved. Okay. We'll get from Amy as soon as you can how much of what the health is going to look like, and without creating a cliff. We'll evaluate releasing the 850 in general fund health reserves. That would help you with some of the CNR if we can do that. Budget comparisons, Mark, just because you're new, just a reminder, when we do year-to-year comparisons, it's not the supplemental, the amended budget that we've done to the new budget. It's what was approved by the voters to what was approved by voters, not the in-between. Sure, I've got everything. Okay, so this is, but I think we also want to say loud and clear, our target is still 2.5. Anything we can do to Bird's Point, we gotta dig. But we're also not crazy people, and we know that that's
We're
looking
doing
hard.
rounds. Let's see what we get with this round, and then we might have to do another round.
At one point, we had said we want to ultimately, and it may not be going all the way in the first year to get to that rate. And if we had to recognize the fact that it may not be able to do it in that first year, I'm pretty sure we had that conversation at one.
This is where I think we start negotiating against ourselves. So I think we should still say it's a 2.5, and let's let this round carry itself out. You're right. Hey, we always know that in the end we could say maybe we are comfortable with something other than that.
Well, so does that mean the 2% and the 2.9 that we just discussed, that's off the table now?
No, it's still, it's a starting point.
Trying to get there.
That's step one.
Yeah,
That
there's
gets
a lot
us
of
to
moving parts though. So
potentially
like if we give these
4%.
targets, it gives us a fighting chance to get there, and we might need another round, or we might need to compromise on where we're going to get to.
I think that's right.
Otherwise, it just becomes absurd because then we're going to ask people to do things that they're not going to be able to do, and then I don't know. We could negotiate this a lot of different ways. We could overshoot it too.
I'm okay with it, but it seems to me what we're saying is here's our guidance. Our guidance is get to this number and then we'll talk some more.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. It's like, we need you to at least get to here. And we might need you to get more, but we
We
don't
will
know.
need you to
But that's the important part, is to get to this point and have a couple priorities in case we need to go even farther. That's what we've said.
Yeah, and we're all putting skin in the game.
Amy, I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in this conversation.
I just know too much.
What?
I know too much.
In terms of,
Like, I know, we're far enough in Matt's budget, and it's gonna be very difficult. Very difficult.
all right, well, let's see if we can do
We
it.
can't let that stop us because we could say we're too far along in lots of things, right? So it just has to be.
Taxes and where our mill rate is, we've done, yeah, everybody's going to be uncomfortable. Let's try and do it.
Okay.
All right, so we'll do with that. It's not ideal. I think
No,
none of
let's
us-
move on.
Okay. We then have the minutes. I did talk with Art about the minutes that we received.
Yeah, I'd like to move we table. I have a bunch of things in there I'd like to talk to someone about. I got this kind of late, and I'd like to table it this time, and if there's, give me somebody I can talk to. There are, 4 or 5 items which are, a couple of errors, a couple of things which are not complete that I addressed rather orally try to sort that out with someone, so I'd move we table the minutes for.
Second.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that.
Okay, so those will be tabled. Just as a point of information in your packets, there is the Simsbury Development Update presentation from our planning director, which was very helpful. Mark, I don't know, in the future, do you also get a narrative with that? Who gets these updates?
Well, I do. I don't know everybody else who gets them.
How often do you get them?
I get them when I request them from a phone call. I don't know. I don't know how often they go to the commission.
I don't know how long.
I would just ask, as you get them, could you please share them with our board? It helps with our long-term planning. And can we get sort of summaries of what the projects are worth, so we can sort of get a concept?
Semi-annually would be sufficient, Chair, a couple times a year.
Yeah. I mean, it's a top priority for you. I'm assuming you're monitoring this pretty closely.
It's all about grand list growth.
But sensible grand list growth. Right. And there is a zoning change going on actually today down.
I understand they're hopeful that they'll close the public hearing. Today, Chair, was the last update I got from the planning director
And
earlier.
there's also a new, just north of the ice skating rink. They're looking to change the development there. Perhaps something will come down the line in that area.
Something large.
Right.
Is there also a zoning commission meeting tomorrow?
I don't know.
That's tomorrow. Yeah, that's the one where they'll close the public hearing, I think.
That's the one about the ADU?
That's correct.
Okay, that's what I thought.
All right.
So I don't know what it is tonight.
All right. So it's not great. I'll call Matt and Wendy and sort of say what I'll try and communicate it as best I can. I don't think they're going to be surprised by that. I, mentioned to Jeff this morning, and whether they can get there, whether we can get there.
So read it back that it's 2% for the town and 2.9 for the.
Increase. So we're not saying no increase.
No,
We're
right.
lowering the increase from what. Now, when I will say, Mark, when you give us fixed costs, those weren't fixed costs because we didn't have the net numbers, we didn't have the savings from vacancy, we didn't have all this other stuff. So they were not actual fixed costs. We might need to change.
So the 2 and the 2.9 leads to a
3.6.
3.6.
But it's 4.
It's a 3.6, which turns into a 4 when we
If the state,
absorb that.
if we have to absorb the state.
Okay.
If we don't have to absorb those state numbers, it could be better than that.
And then, so 3.6/4. However, our goal is to be even a point lower than that.
Yeah, it's
More than a
defined.
point lower than that.
Right. So that's about 1.2 million we need to find.
So the reason we're not setting lower targets is that we want to set ourselves the goal of making up some of the difference.
I mean, we have already committed to actually 1.3 million of reserves.
Right.
We've committed to 200,000 of reserves for the ambulance, so that's already 1.5 that we committed to.
That's already in there, right? And the reason that we're stopping there and not saying instead of 2.9, it's 1 and 1.9, whatever,
I mean-
is because we do have an idea that there might be some relief on the revenue side. We're not going to hold our, we're not going to use hope as our strategy for that, but there is
I mean,
that potential.
it gives us pause to not go more dramatic until we know those numbers, I guess I would say. It says let's not be extreme until we know what those numbers are. If the numbers come in bad, we have to go back. Does that make sense, or?
Look, I'm trusting our partners because I think they're voicing that going further than this is a lot. So I think if we ask them to do that right out of the gate without having more information,
Right,
it looks like we're not doing our part to wait it out a little bit and see what else we can get out of it, right?
exactly.
lots of ways you can go about this, but it feels like the right partnership to have. But I think your point earlier, Chair, around letting people know that this might not be it is important.
I think it's important, especially now, if looking at the calendar, the Board of Ed's got their workshop beginning of February. I'm not sure what the town does, but knowing that this is possibly just the first step before, so think about it if you have to go all the way.
And I don't think we should apologize for this, right? I mean, there's a grant list that is what it is, and there's $400,000 that went up in smoke, right? So that's what we're up against.
But I think one thing that really is going to be important is that piece from Francine on the savings on the car
Say that again,
tax.
I couldn't hear you.
The savings that we're going to find from the car tax, if we can get some way to evaluate what that looks like in dollars, and the sooner we can get that, I think the better all of us. I don't know what Francine's timeline is on getting that.
Well, her grand list is due at the end of the month, and she's probably still there working on it, so it'd probably be the first week of February.
Okay, so in the first week in February, we'll have the governor's number and we'll have the true impact, and then we'll be able to really take a look and see where we are with that. Mark, as you talk with your colleagues, if we can get indication of where they are with their grand list, we were waiting to hear from CCM if people were seeing similar drops as we were. The first indication is West Hartford, yes, they saw almost an identical drop. So we do expect to see that. And right now, I think most people aren't attuned to it. I think as more towns realize what's going on, they're going to panic and there'll be an outroar at the state, I hope. But if you could keep track of that, where our peers are, one of the things we look at is our mill rate compared to our peer towns. So if you could just keep up where their budgets are coming in and stuff like that.
Chair, was it your intent to put anything out publicly other than the two budget messages that are in line for the regular process? I know there's been some talk.
You know,
I don't know where you landed on that. I mean, certainly
I was-
we're agreeable if that's what you want to do, but
So Amy helped with some of the numbers. I was thinking about doing a brace for impact letter, sort of explaining the situation. I'm struggling with it. I need some help on the writing if anyone is interested in that. I'm having a hard time articulating it, but I think that it may be worth putting something out.
well, in view of tonight's guidance, I would say maybe yes.
Okay.
So,
In what form, a letter to?
Yeah, a letter could be from this board or from
To the citizens of.
to the citizens of Simsbury. Wanted to
Just
alert you.
connecting the major dots here,
Yes.
grand list growth, losing some revenue sources, and then in the face of still like the tail end of inflation.
Exactly.
I think it's never a bad thing. I just think it's probably good to be short and sweet in that too.
That's where I'm struggling trying to get.
I'm
it,
happy
but
to help.
Oh, okay, that'd be great.
Some advice.
All right. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Just a little bit.
Covered a lot.
All right.
Will you entertain a motion
I
to
will.
adjourn? I so move.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you,
Aye.
everyone. That was a nice short.
For over 40 years, SCM has been the voice of our town.
bringing us together through local programming,
Education and live broadcasts.
SEM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community.
Ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings.
And celebrating milestones.
like our high school graduations.
But today, SEM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions. And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SEM receives less revenue.
Even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open.
Continues to educate our youth and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SEM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive.
For generations to come.
Visit our website
Or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media.
where your town
Your schools
And your government come together.